Chapter 659. In the command hall on the outskirts of the capital special district, dozens of senior generals with gold stars on their shoulders were either standing or sitting. They were staring at the circular light beam in front of them nervously. President Pabre, the National Security Advisor, the director of the Military Committee of the Parliament, and other senior officials were standing next to the railing on the second floor. The picture on the enormous circular light beam was intermittent. Because of the loss of long-distance transmission, it was very blurred. One could barely see that a ragged three-winged warship of a weird shape was moving at full speed in the strange space. Around the three-winged warship, hundreds of black and green warships of the Imperium could be vaguely seen. The pursuit that took place in the distant space zone of the Imperium caught the attention of all the big shots in the leadership of the Federation. When the optical capture systems of the two signal relay satellites that had been activated by luck failed, they could no longer see the picture from the external perspective. They could only see the deeper path of the universe through the equipment of the fugitive three-winged warship. In the intermittent picture, except for the warships of the Imperium that occasionally showed up from above and below, no one could see the large group of warships of the Imperium that were chasing the three-winged warship closely. However, the green light spots that represented the warships of the Imperium on the radar system were increasing in number. They were as dense as vultures, making everyone extremely nervous and worried. Charge! Accelerate! The high-ranking generals of the Federation, who were usually extremely solemn, finally could not help but shout in a low voice. Noises rang out on the first floor of the command hall. The generals knew that their cheering from billions of kilometers away could not make the fleeing tri-winged warship fly faster, but they still subconsciously clenched their fists, frowned, and shouted loudly. Are the people of the Imperium crazy? The National Security Advisor of the Federation looked at the calculation result that he just received in shock. Looking at the count of the warships of the Imperium that were chasing the three-winged warship, he exclaimed in disbelief, 3 medium fleets have been mobilized just to chase one three-winged warship. Does their space zone not need to be defended? Such a crazy and undisciplined pursuit. If they run into the Federation fleet, all they need is a crossbow formation to shoot at the same time, and 1/3 of their warships will be destroyed easily. The generals in the command hall had long noticed this, but they were also puzzled. They couldn't understand why the Empire would take such a huge risk to chase after that fleeing three-wingers. General Miles' thick eyebrows furrowed slightly as he mocked, could it be that Colonel Su Lu raped the princess? Laughter burst out from both the upper and lower floors of the hall. However, the laughter soon subsided because the intermittent images on the light beam had begun to show the shadows of the cannons of the Imperium. Those deadly lines brushed past the porthole of the three-winged warship and were extremely dangerous. No one knew if they would hit the three-winged warship in the next moment. The head of the military committee, who had hurried over from the Parliament Hill, glanced at President Pabre, who had been silent all this time, with a complicated expression. He moved closer and said in a low voice, "The Federal fleet has set off in a hurry. If we really start a war with the Imperium fleet, both sides are not prepared. I'm worried that the losses will be too great." The senator did not speak too clearly, but in fact, this was the innermost words of the big shots present, including the military. The frontline troops of the Federation being disrupted, the plan to attack the X-3 system delayed, and the fleet setting off in a hurry, no one knew what price the Federation would pay for such a change, and all of this was just to save one person. Was it worth it? Although the three-winged warship had sent back a piece of encrypted intelligence, and it was said that Su Lu had a second piece of very important intelligence in his hands, was it really worth it? Don't worry about the benefits of intelligence. Don't even consider that this is a first-order incident for now. There was not the slightest expression on Pabre's dark face. He raised his arm and pointed at the dense dots of light that represented the Imperium fleet on the holographic screen. The Imperium is willing to pay any price to kill him. Do you think our Federation can't do the same? I've said it just now. We have to pay any price. Remember, pay any price. Right at this moment, the director of the presidential residence office, Bryn, hung up the phone and walked behind President Pabre with a solemn expression. He said in a low voice, "Mr. President, CO Nutshell called to ask about this matter. He is very concerned about the safety of Colonel Su Lu." President Pabre frowned and looked at Brin in confusion. Brin then continued in a low voice, "Many other parties have also called. They want to confirm the truth of this matter. For some reason, the news that Colonel Su Lu is still alive has been leaked online. The Federation TV station has asked if they can broadcast the official news. Out of consideration of political influence, the Federation would definitely not make a big deal out of this matter before it was certain that Su Lu could be safely brought back. However, for some reason, the situation that should have been strictly confidential had already started to spread on the civilian network in an extremely short amount of time. I'll arrange the network channel management right away," Director Brin said immediately after seeing that President Pabre had been silent this entire time. "No need." President Pabre waved his hand. "I'll authorize the news channel to release the official news, but you must be very careful with the image selections." Su Lu was still alive. He was flying towards the Federation on a broken three-winged battleship. Behind him were countless battleships from the Empire. This news that shocked the entire Federation society was naturally deliberately released by some big shots who had the means to get in touch with this matter. There was no wind or rain in the back mountain today, but the air was a bit cold. Lady Tai was wearing a fur shawl with her arms around her elbows. She silently looked at the lake and mountains in front of her and thought to herself, if that little guy is really lucky enough to come back alive, will the political situation in the Federation change? Will he pursue the matter of the ancient bell ship relentlessly? Definitely, according to Su Li's temperament, he will definitely do so. Lady Tai's lips curled up into an inexplicable smile. She said to Secretary Shen beside her, "Every war will add a lot of bargaining chips to the military's power, especially those crazy young men. It's not a good thing to have too much power. I'm very curious. When Su Lu comes back in such a glorious manner, how are they going to deal with it?" Secretary Shen was silent. His right hand that was hanging by his leg moved slightly. After a while, he said softly, "According to your instructions, the entire Federation knows about this matter. All we can do now is to hope that Colonel Su Lu can have this luck." All the people of the Federation who were watching TV stopped what they were doing almost at the same time. Whether it was the update manuscripts that their superiors were desperately urging or the dishwashing towels that their wives were forcing into their hands, they were all put aside. They looked at the news channel in shock, listened to the female anchor's excited and joyful voice, and listened to the name of the hero of the Federation that had gradually faded away. Some of them couldn't believe their eyes and ears. In countless apartment buildings and university dormitories, loud cheers and excited screams rang out. Some people even excitedly threw beer bottles downstairs. On the news channel, the tri-winged battleship that carried the hero's complex and dreams hidden in the depths of countless people's hearts was silently moving forward in the dark background of the universe. Countless densely packed battleships of the Empire chased after it. The picture was very blurry and intermittent, as if it was covered with countless layers of mosaics. The excited and nervous people immediately turned their attention to the internet, trying to find more information and more pictures of the tri-winged battleship. A wedding was being held in the Wenhua Hotel in Gangdu. There were many guests and expensive cars. The scene was very grand and extravagant. It attracted the attention of countless people. Putting aside the fact that both parties involved in the wedding were youths with extremely good backgrounds and prospects in the Federation, just by looking at the fact that the witness today was the president of the Nutshell Mobile Company, a giant corporation in the Federation, one could roughly imagine how grand this wedding would be. "I'm just a distant relative of the Chow family. I'm not a member of the 7 major families." The dull and honest young man was wearing an expensive suit today. He looked at the exceptionally beautiful bride and said honestly, "So I didn't mean to hide it from you. The legendary 7 major families have nothing to do with our wedding." Shang Qiu was wearing a red strapless dress today. Her tender breasts were particularly charming and proud. However, her face still maintained the calmness of an engineer. She didn't show the shyness or nervousness of a newlywed. When she heard the groom's words, she shrugged and said, "It doesn't matter if you hide it or not. I agreed to marry you because you're probably the only one who can agree to my unreasonable conditions. But then again, I still have an important technical meeting to attend tomorrow. In order to deal with your parents' S3 honeymoon trip, I'm afraid I have to end it early. The groom was a little disappointed. However, he noticed from the corner of his eyes that the most important guest of today's wedding, as well as the witness of their wedding, the president of the Nutshell Motor Company, seemed to have a strange expression. The president of the Nutshell Motor Company hung up the phone and walked in front of the two with a complicated expression. After thinking for a long time, he said to the groom, "I'm sorry." The groom and Shang Qiu looked at the president in surprise. They thought, even if you have something urgent to do, you don't have to say sorry so sincerely, right? The president turned to Shang Qiu and said with a smile, "I think I have to tell you before you get married. Otherwise, I'm really worried that you'll choose to resign from the Nutshell Motor Company because you hate me for the rest of your life." Su Lu is still alive. Hearing this, Shang Qiu, who was about to get married today, was stunned. She held the hem of her dress and froze. Then, without hesitation, she turned her head and looked at the groom, who was also shocked. She bowed and apologized very sincerely, "I'm sorry." Then she turned and walked out of the Wenhua Hotel. On the giant screen across the street, the female news anchor had begun to speak and was about to play a video. "I finally understand why you said sorry just now." The young man with the surname Chow looked at the figure walking out of the hotel reluctantly. Surprisingly, he was not angry. Instead, he was unusually calm. He said to the president, "It turns out that Shang Qiu and Colonel Su Lu are old friends. It seems that my taste is really good." Shang Qiu did not hear the man's very elegant words. At this moment, all her attention was on the huge screen across the street. Her left hand gently pulled open the tube top that made it difficult for her to breathe. She took out the foldable glasses from her cleavage and put them on the bridge of her small nose. Shang Qiu began to watch silently and attentively with a smile. The late autumn wind blew on her tender white face, making it a little itchy. Nen Xiangmei had just finished her holiday with the foundation. Under the persuasion of her mother, she was going to take another long holiday to tidy up her mood. At this time, she was packing with the help of the servant. After putting the books she liked into the suitcase, her eyes fell on the train ticket on the table. The journey this time was like a high-speed rail. She was prepared to retrace the path of the past. It was just that she no longer had any contact with her best friend, and the man she had seen in the carriage for several years had long gone to a faraway place with no return. Nan Xiangmei did not cry. A kind of peaceful, soft, and strong luster appeared on her beautiful cheeks. She picked up the train ticket and said softly to herself and the man who left, "I'm not reliving the journey of the past because I'm afraid of forgetting you. It's because I won't forget you. It's just that since you don't want to come back, I want to have a formal farewell with you. The farewell is not to forget you, but to hide you at the bottom of my heart. In the future, when I'm old, I'll tell my granddaughter that I once liked a real man who was never afraid in the face of difficulties." While the beautiful girl was feeling sentimental, a scream suddenly sounded from the living room next to her. She walked over in surprise and saw the nanny who had raised her since she was a child and knew all her secrets. She was pointing in a direction with a strange expression. Her mouth was wide open, but she was so shocked that she couldn't say anything. Nan Xiangmei turned her head curiously and saw the scene on the TV screen. When she heard the voiceover commentary, she suddenly covered her mouth and her body trembled slightly. She decided that she would never cry for that man again. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. Inside the old mansion in the Weitu district of the Sunset region of the West Forest region, little Watermelon, who had just finished school, was eating an ice cream cone while watching a pirated CD she had brought back from the Wangdu apartment more than a year ago. It was very obvious that the fat Uncle Tian had a sense of failure when it came to family education. Although this little princess liked to comfort herself with this kind of pornographic video and audio works, fantasizing about avenging her parents and brother Su Lu, it was always a little boring to watch the purple-haired captain lead the federal army over and over again to defeat the Empire's invaders, so she subconsciously moved her fingers slightly and switched the channel back to the TV. The ice cream cone in the little girl's hand that was in the middle of feeding her adorable mouth hit her sharp nose with a bang. She widened her bright eyes and only came back to her senses after a long time. She screamed and jumped up from the sofa, Her short black hair spread out like a watermelon skin in the a detached villa in the West Mountain compound. Zhou Liuhua, who had been spoiled by the defense minister's wife and countless idlers, was angry at this time. The little boy, who had already learned to recite Schiller's poems, was unwilling to say a word to his grandmother and the nanny who were trying to persuade him. He screamed and kicked the glass coffee table in front of him. He grabbed everything around him and threw it at the TV screen in front of him. It was because his favorite cartoon was suddenly gone, and a woman with heavy makeup that he hated appeared on the TV. Minister Zhou's wife had retired, and for the past few years, she had been taking care of this little ancestor at home. She spoiled him a lot, and none of the orderlies and logistics aunties in the minister's building dared to disobey his wishes. Also, he inherited some of his mother's bad temperament, so no one dared to talk to him. No one dared to teach him a lesson. But a crisp sound rang out. Zhou Yu, who was still wearing pink pajamas like an unmarried girl, hurried upstairs and slapped the little boy in the face. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Zhou screamed in shock and protected the little boy behind her. Seeing that his mother, who loved him so much, had slapped him, the little boy covered his red face and cried loudly. His little arms and legs kicked even more fiercely. After a while, he saw that his mother was staring at the TV in a daze and didn't care about him at all. He angrily reached out his hand from his grandmother's side and tried to grab his grandfather's precious ashtray. He was about to smash it on the TV. "If you dare to smash it, I'll kill you." Zhou Yu kept looking at the TV screen and didn't turn around. This simple sentence was full of coldness, but it stunned everyone in the living room. Children were naughty animals who could sense real danger the most. Sensing the lethality of Zhou Yu's words, he sniffled and put down the ashtray in his hand while crying. He didn't understand. Last time, when he burned his grandfather's hair, his mother wasn't so angry. Why was she so serious today? Of course, he didn't know that it was because the TV was broadcasting the return of his father. The same scene happened in many other places. Just as Schiller said, happy families were always similar. Then, they and their happiness and excitement were at least similar at this moment. However, there were also many people who cared about Su Lu who didn't see this historic scene. At that time, Tai Ziyuan was personally applying for a financial subcard for Bai Qi. He had a headache over these trivial procedures. Because Macho's financial support to him was suspended, even Butler Jean and the staff were forced to leave the Westwoods with tears streaming down their faces. At this time, Shi Qinghai was like a gopher, walking through the underground sewer of the Federation's Investigation Bureau headquarters. The small blue device in his hand glowed faintly, illuminating the rusty nameplate in front of him, clearly showing the serial port of the database. The news channel's breaking news report ended very quickly, and the screen returned to darkness. There were no problems with the specially selected video. Only the conspiracy theorists on the internet who were used to scanning and analyzing frame by frame were still researching. Soon, they came to a conclusion that this video was real. The problem was that 1 second before the video ended, the left abdomen of the tri-winged spaceship that Colonel Su Lu was on seemed to have been hit by the cannons of the Empire's battleship. Countless protest calls were made to the Federation's TV station, asking if the tri-winged spaceship had been sunk by the Empire and why there was no follow-up video. The Federal forces are locating it. The fleet has already begun the rescue operation. "Let us pray for Colonel Su Lu," said the female news anchor sincerely. Just like the atmosphere in the conference room on planet Huang, after the excitement and joy, there was endless worry. The entire Federation, from the distant East Woods to the West Woods, from the capital to the 4 states around S2, anxiously and nervously waited for the latest news. The Bureau of Proclamation's tri-winged spaceship was one of the fastest spaceships in space. Although it had drifted in the Empire's territory for too long and had become a little strange and tattered, under the old man's policy of robbing supplies, it was still in good condition. This was especially true for its engine system, which was even more powerful than a year ago. However, because the repair parts were all smuggled spaceships or pirate spaceships, the tri-winged spaceship's assembly system was not stable. After a long period of high-intensity flight, there were already ominous signs. The most important thing was the densely packed battleships of the Empire. Such a terrifying number of battleships was beyond Su Li's imagination and the old man's calculation. Although the tri-winged spaceship still had the advantage in speed, the Empire's battleships had obviously been waiting outside the L9 system's smuggling tunnel and were already prepared for an ambush. Even though the tri-winged spaceship had almost crazily charged through 2 warp holes, it was still surrounded by the vast universe's fleet and was forced into a desperate situation. Why Chaoshi is crazy? This woman is crazy. Su Lu looked at the decreasing value of the life support system with a pale face and shouted angrily, "Hundreds of lions chasing a rabbit? How can there be something so crazy?" At this time, he was already sure that the densely packed Empire's fleet was not preparing for some big military operation, but to prevent him from returning to the Federation. The moment he thought of this, he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. The tri-winged spaceship had been hit by the Empire's cannons 3 times in a row. 3 terrifying melted holes appeared on the high-strength, tattered metal outer shell, and the spaceship's life support system was on the verge of collapse. A violent tremor hit again. Su Li's body was bounced high up in the air and then fell heavily. 2 streams of blood flowed out of his lips. He said angrily, "Why didn't I dodge again?" Rushing out to the streets in a storm to play romantic games. "How can your clothes not get wet at all?" The old man's tone was obviously not very good. "I only let 4 drops of rain fall on you. What more do you want?" This sentence was very powerful. The Empire's fleet did not care about the cost, and some of them even fired aimlessly from a long distance. It was like a basin of angry rain pouring down from the sky. No matter how hard he tried to dodge, it was impossible to dodge all of them. In fact, under the control of the old man, the tri-winged spaceship made some unbelievable movements in space from time to time. The fact that it could survive until now under the intense bombardment had already shocked the commanders of the Empire's fleet and the generals of the distant Federation. "Warning, the spaceship has suffered severe power loss. We must land immediately." The old man's voice returned to its mechanical and calm state. "Where are we now? How far is the Federation's rescue fleet?" "We have entered the periphery of the Gamma Galaxy, not far from X3. 3 seconds ago, we successfully activated 4 charter signal relay satellites. The Federal fleet is still very far away." Miserable, so miserable. Looking at the collapsing metal pieces outside the porthole, Su Lu narrowed his eyes and sighed softly. "Old man, just find a planet where people can live and land." The old man's mechanical voice jumped again. "This is not the escape after the catastrophe. No one has prepared a planet where people can live for you. Give up the hope. The closest planet to us now is a deserted mineral planet. It is absolutely not suitable for human beings to live on. You will die if you live on it." "Why?" "It has an atmosphere. Light wave analysis shows that it is not poisonous, but the oxygen level is too low. Even ants can't live there." "You just mentioned the escape after the catastrophe? A planet where people can live. What do you mean?" "Did I say that?" What ended the conversation between the man and the machine in desperation was the cannon fire of the Empire's warship. Accompanied by a violent explosion, a cluster of gorgeous flames appeared at the tail of the tri-winged spaceship and then quickly extinguished in the vacuum environment. The last scene that the Federation's command hall saw was that the tri-winged spaceship was hit by the fierce cannon fire of the Empire's warship. The tri-winged spaceship was severely damaged, and it miserably fell toward a nearby mineral planet. After a long time, a small light appeared in the darkness. A small light that was so far away could actually be a terrifying explosion. The 4 charter signal relay satellites that had just been activated were instantly destroyed by the Empire's fleet. The anxious technicians adjusted the image to the tri-winged spaceship's main view, but it was also dark. The generals in the advance base of Planet Yellow Doom were silent. Du Shaoqing slowly stood up, holding the sunglasses that he had taken off. He leaned forward slightly and stared at the light screen in the sky, as if he was trying to find the figure of that guy in the darkness. The people in the S1 command hall were silent. General Myers slapped his thigh angrily and stood up with his eyes wide open. President Pabre frowned deeply and was silent for a long time. "The parameter analysis report that we just received. A staff officer looked down at the light screen on the workbench and reported in a deep voice, "According to the image before the tri-wing spaceship was hit, the main tank on the rear wing of the tri-wing spaceship was destroyed, and the life support system collapsed. Adding the impact of the fall, it should be completely destroyed. The oxygen content in the atmosphere of this mineral planet is 0.14%, which is not enough to support the respiratory system." The staff officer raised his head with some difficulty and looked at the people with serious expressions. He said, "According to the analysis of the charter computer, Colonel Sulu should have been killed." After a long silence, the National Security Advisor suddenly moved close to the president's ear and said, "Mr. President, should we order the federal fleet to withdraw immediately?" President Pabre's dark face showed no emotion. He stared at the dark circular light screen and suddenly slammed the table with force. He said loudly, "Order the federal fleet to continue to move faster and prepare for battle." Then he said to Director Breen in a deep voice, "Let the news channel continue to broadcast this dark image live. I want to see a miracle happen." In the distant space, the federal fleet was also silent. Three-star General Hong Yuliang wiped the sweat off his forehead and closed his eyes to think. After a while, he ordered, "Continue to move forward. Order the 3rd Airborne Mecha Brigade to prepare for a strong landing." After a long time, the distant empire finally sent back news. The 3 crazy and cruel Federation fleets started to turn back and retreat when they were 14 astronomical units away from the Federal fleet. For them, the tri-winged spaceship of the Federation was destroyed, and the person on the spaceship was dead. Their mission was complete. Naturally, they didn't want to engage in an unprepared space battle with the Federation's main fleet. However, there was still no news from the mineral planet. The news channel started to broadcast again, but the anxious Federation citizens could only see darkness. They roughly understood what had happened, so they started to pray silently. In the command hall, the light screen in front of President Pabre was dark. In the charter square, the citizens put their hands under their chins and prayed, but the giant light screen was still dark. Countless TV screens in countless apartment buildings were dark. There was no change at all. Time passed by slowly. At the main entrance of the Wenhua Hotel, Shang Qiu looked at the dark light screen across the street through the glass. She didn't know why, but she slowly put her hands behind her back. Her right hand held her left wrist in the autumn wind. Although silent, she was unusually firm. In the office on Parliament Hill, Zhang Xiaoming slowly took off her glasses and rubbed her forehead. She looked at the black TV screen and closed her eyes. She put her hands behind her back and gently clasped them together. Based on her beliefs, she never prayed to the Creator, but she prayed for that person to live. In the courtyard of Shishan Mountain, Zhou Yu frowned and looked at the dark TV screen. His hands were behind his back, and his knuckles were slightly white. There was a piercing coldness in his eyes. "Since you have inexplicably come back to life, how dare you let me watch you die inexplicably again?" In this long and torturous wait, countless light screens were still dark and cold. No image appeared. However, just as everyone was about to lose hope, a hoarse voice filled with electrical noise sounded in countless places in the Federation at the same time. "I'm Sulu. I'm out of the cockpit now. I feel good." Chapter 660. 3 medium-sized Federation air-to-ground transport ships dragged their long tails as they charged into the atmosphere, drawing 3 clear lines in the air. After leaving the mothership, the transport ships used their fastest speed to search the strange and desolate mineral planet. They finally found the weak signal near the southeastern plateau. However, due to the magnetic interference, they couldn't pinpoint the exact location. After a while, the alloy gate at the bottom of the transport ship slowly opened. More than 10 tall black MX mechas roared as they jumped out. With the help of the auxiliary wings, they instantly glided over a height of more than 10 meters, completing an extremely risky forced landing. The surface of the dead mineral planet was filled with large rock peaks. Amidst the clouds of dust caused by the forced landing of the Federation MX mechas, the 3 transport ships drew an arc from left to right and flew towards the slightly flatter temporary landing site more than 10 kilometers away. "We have landed. Searching in progress. Signal source within 3 kilometers. On the surface of the mineral planet that was severely lacking in oxygen, the 10 black MX mechas activated vacuum mode. In the quiet and slightly noisy communication system, the voices of the pilots rang out from time to time. These Federation soldiers knew the importance of their mission very well. They knew that these reports would not only be transmitted back to the Fleet Command Hall and the forward base of Planet Yellow Disaster, but also to the ears of the President and countless Federation citizens. "We found him." The voice in the communication system suddenly became agitated. The elite pilots of the 3rd Airborne Mecha Brigade of the Federal Fleet did not think that the target they were rescuing was still alive. Although the target had said something calm and exciting, the oxygen content in the atmosphere of this planet was too low. Hence, when they saw the scene in front of them, their strong wills that had been honed on the battlefield couldn't help but be shaken by the scene in front of them. The rock peak in front of them had already collapsed. The dust had already been blown away by the wind. The Bureau of Proclamation's 3-winged ship that had attracted the attention of the entire universe had fallen miserably among the rocks. When the 3-winged ship fell, it had obviously caused an explosion. However, because of the lack of oxygen, the explosion wasn't strong enough. It looked like a large piece of iron that had been smoked for billions of years. Dozens of meters away in the sand, the target they had been searching for was sitting cross-legged on the ground. The emergency communication equipment beside him was scattered. This guy was covered in blood and dust. He looked battered and exhausted, but his eyes were closed and his thin lips were tightly pursed. He looked so calm. It seemed that this guy was just a little tired, so he sat on the sand to rest for a while. The problem was, who could rest in an air with only 0.14% oxygen? In the surveillance light screen, the person who was sitting peacefully in the sand with his eyes closed was too quiet. Even his chest was not moving up and down. His face was abnormally pale, giving people a feeling of fear. The 3MX mecha closest to him roared away. As soon as the heavy mechanical legs landed, the hatch of one of the MX mecha opened instantly. A thin, slightly short major of the Federation jumped down without hesitation and staggered to Su Li's side. This major looked at the burn marks on Su Li's pale face and the purplish bruises that were slowly spreading across his thin lips. A trace of panic and fear flashed through his bright eyes behind the transparent helmet. He took off his oxygen mask as quickly as possible and roughly put it over Su Li's nose and mouth, completely ignoring the danger he was about to face. The pilot of the 3rd Airborne Mecha Brigade also followed him out of the cockpit and brought the seemingly dead Su Li back into the MX mecha. The hatch of the MX mecha quickly closed with the hum of the engine. The thin major pulled out his oxygen mask and breathed rapidly several times. After waiting for the life support system to replenish the oxygen in the cockpit, he pulled down the mask on Su Li's face with force and patted his cheeks lightly. He said, "Wake up." And so, Su Li woke up. After adjusting from that strange and mysterious internal breathing to the normal lobe breathing of a human, the severe lack of oxygen made him unable to immediately adapt to the current environment in the cockpit. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the face in front of him whose eyes were tightly shut and who was frantically urging him to wake up. His vision was a little blurry, but for some reason, he felt that this face was incredibly familiar. It was as if he had been looking at this face for countless years and had already carved it into the deepest recesses of his mind. A few drops of tears fell from the corner of that panicked Federation major's tightly shut eyes out of fear. They dripped onto Su Li's dust-covered face, waking him up a little more. Then, more tears fell. The colonel holding him in his arms cried incessantly, patting or rather stroking his cheeks and saying softly, "Wake up quickly. I still have a lot of questions to ask you. For example, why is your face so thin?" Tears fell like rain on Su Li's face, washing away the dust and pain. It was a little salty, just like the beautiful sea beside the Golden Star Hotel in the Westwoods. Su Li slowly opened his eyes wide. Looking at that beautiful and heart-stirring face so close to him, he opened his mouth and asked in shock, "Jian Shuier, why are you here?" Even though he had obtained a great increase in personal combat strength during his 1 year in the Empire, the endless escape and injuries had also accumulated a lot of injuries. These injuries suddenly erupted when the tri-winged warship crashed into the ground. At this moment, Sulu was extremely weak, and his voice was exceptionally hoarse and soft. Jian Shuer, who was holding him in her arms, was in extreme nervousness and pain, so she didn't hear these words at all. Sulu lightly pursed his lips. Looking at Jian Shuer's face that was so close to him, a trace of an incomparably brilliant smile appeared on his face. In his past impression, this national idol still carried a trace of absolute calmness behind her gentle appearance even after she had become extremely close to him. Who could have imagined such a weeping beauty like today? It seemed that he had finally returned alive. This felt really good. Being hugged tightly by Jian Shuer, that soft and warm feeling, felt really good. Stop crying. If you continue to touch me so hard, my face will definitely become even thinner. Sulu spoke again with some difficulty. This time, Jian Shuer heard him. She opened her eyes in confusion and looked at the thin but still familiar face that was so close to her. Looking at the pair of incomparably clean and interesting eyes, she finally understood what had happened. Her mouth opened in disbelief, and she stuttered, "You're alive? I'm not dead." After reporting the news of successfully rescuing Colonel Sulu to the fleet, Jian Shuer finally completely relaxed. She didn't care how the Federation would rejoice after hearing this news. She only cared about the current condition of the man in her arms. At this moment, she suddenly remembered that she had been hugging Sulu tightly all this time, and had been crying for him all this time. Looking down, she saw Suli's head was tightly pressed against her chest, and he was looking at her with his eyes wide open. 2 traces of blush gradually spread across his cheeks. "You can help me up now," Sulu said. Jian Shuer's subconscious reaction was to push Sulu away, but for some reason, she didn't do so. Instead, she hugged this man tighter in her arms. With a trace of stubbornness, she thought to herself, "Since you're alive, then I'll never let you go again. 2 days ago, I wrote too much. Today, I suddenly became absent-minded. Plus, I was busy with some personal matters, so I only wrote 2,000 words. Tomorrow I'll write 3 chapters. Chapter 661. Translator, Ryuxinji Editor. H2-H2 Mr. the Black MX Mecha chose to drive on autopilot over the rugged terrain. The distinct undulations made the 2 people in the cockpit feel as if they were on a small boat in the middle of a stormy sea. Meanwhile, the dim lighting and the muffled electronic sounds of the equipment in the small space made them easily recall the 1,000-mile escape after that concert 3 years ago, as well as that final period of deep sleep. Sulu felt the softness of the hand on his cheek. Only then did he understand that the Federation's standard pilot uniform had a certain degree of resistance to puncture, but was unable to block out the sensation of touch. His already tired and raspy voice became even hoarser as he muttered, "This isn't very good, is it? What's not good about it?" By this time, Jian Shuer had already regained her composure. She smiled charmingly and said, "3 years ago, in 5460, you also secretly hugged me while I was asleep." Sulu was stunned. He knew that the girl beside him had not been asleep that night, and knew what he had done. He could not help but feel ashamed. He wanted to cover his face, but found that the act of burrowing into her soft embrace was even more embarrassing. Why would Fei Cheng agree to let you join the frontline forces? In order to dispel the faint warmth in the cockpit, he asked in a low voice, "It's very dangerous here. After you went to the Empire, everyone thought you were dead. I was no exception." Jian Shuer glanced at the electronic map on the screen, and then made a simple manual adjustment of the mecha. She answered softly, "At the lakeside, I told the old man that I had many things I wanted to know the answer to. For example, the truth behind that victory concert. In the past, I had asked you to do it for me, but now that you're dead, I want to do it myself, so the old man agreed to let me join the fleet." The MX Mecha was still 8 to 9 kilometers away from the temporary platform where the air-to-ground transport ship was. Hearing Jian Shuer's calm words, Sulu suddenly thought of something very important. He crawled up with difficulty, and under her puzzled gaze, made a hand gesture. Jian Shuer saw this gesture, and although she did not understand why, she still immediately shut down the integrated command and communication systems as instructed, blocking the entire MX Mecha from external communications. Su did not speak immediately. He called the old man 3 times in his mind, but received no reply. He narrowed his eyes and directed the SCC to the rear. Looking at the charred wreckage of the spaceship on the screen, an inexplicable sense of emptiness grew in his heart. At this time, he looked into Jian Shui'er's eyes and said seriously, "The things you wanted me to help you, I found a lot of them in the Empire." Jian Shui'er's eyes also narrowed into the 2 most beautiful crescent moons in S1, faintly glowing. This was a big secret about the birth of the national idol of the Federation. Although she was no longer a young girl, she was still an idol that the people of the Federation could not forget. If the Federation found out that her birth mother was from the Empire, what kind of uproar would it cause? Telling this shocking secret on this desolate mineral planet far away from the glory of the Charter was the best logical choice Su had made. Your mother was the concubine of the Empire's emperor. I don't know her name, but I know that she was the daughter of Master Fan. You've never heard of Master Fan? It's a very strange title of nobility in the Empire. It seems that they don't even care about the emperor. She should be dead. The specific cause of death is not very clear, but perhaps it has something to do with that big explosion. A very simple sentence contained too much shocking information. Even though Jian Shui'er had been in the spotlight since she was young, daring to speak freely in front of the Chief Justice of the Federation at a young age, and had many strange speculations about her birth, she could not help but be stunned for a long time. After a long silence, she opened her mouth with some difficulty and asked, "My mother is from the Empire?" This is incredible. Jian Shui'er covered her face, and her slightly trembling voice sounded so confused. "She is the concubine of the Emperor of the Empire? Am I the daughter of the Emperor of the Empire? Is that why the Federation used me as bait to lure the Imperial Expeditionary Force into a war? Fortunately, or unfortunately, your father is still my shameless teacher." Su then said the second guess that shocked Jian Shui'er, and he should still be alive. After saying what had to be said, Su gently patted her shoulder, but he could not find any words to calm the many complicated emotions in the girl's heart at this time. After a moment of silence, he said, "Help me contact Feiqing City. There are some things that I want to ask Military God." The air-to-ground transport ship left the deadly barren mineral star at the fastest speed, drew a clear airflow line, and flew to the abdomen of the main ship in the air intake area. The heavy and huge cabin door slowly opened, and a group of Federation officers walked to the main ship hull from the metal trestle bridge. The pale and thin Su was gently supported by Jian Shui'er and walked at the front. The Federation officers and soldiers in the command hall of the Federation main ship had all stood up, ready to welcome the return of the hero. When they saw Su appear at the front of the metal trestle bridge, they burst into loud cheers and applause without any orders. At this time, the commander of the Federal Fleet, General Hong Yuliang's gentle face appeared on the circular light beam in the center of the hall. The only 3-star female general of the Federation said with a smile, "Colonel Su, welcome back." Su pulled Jian Shui'er's hand away from his arm and saluted to the light beam. General Hong Yuliang on the light beam said gently, "But there's something I have to criticize you about. Major Jian Shui'er, although I know that the two of you definitely have a lot of private things to talk about, please don't turn off the communication system in the future. You have to know that Mr. President personally called to ask what was wrong with that period of radio silence." Seeing the usually serious commander of the Federal Fleet use such a tone to make fun of Su and Jian Shui'er, the officers and soldiers of the fleet knew that the female general's mood must be extremely good. Hearing this, the cheers and applause that had not completely subsided suddenly turned into mischievous whistles. Jian Shui'er, who was standing beside Su, heard this and felt a little shy, but was immediately swallowed up by the shock in her heart that had not yet had time to digest. Then, the main ship of the 3rd Airborne Mecha Brigade embarked on the space journey back to the fleet. This journey was not too long, but because they had to be vigilant of the 3 missing fleets of the Empire, they deliberately slowed down their speed. In the military commander's resting cabin. Because Su needed treatment and rest, no one came to disturb him. Only Jian Shui'er sat beside the half-open healing cabin to accompany him. Her left hand was gently turning a red apple, and her right hand was holding a sharp knife that flashed from time to time. It's been an incredible year. You've suffered so much. It's time for you to get some good news. She peeled off the skin of the apple and put it in front of Su Li's mouth. She smiled and said, I seem to have said the word incredible a little too much today. Although they had a very close personal relationship later on, and this indescribably beautiful girl in front of him had long cut off her purple hair, Su Lu sometimes still treated her as an untouchable dream, an unattainable national idol, just like when he was a teenager. So, he was a little unaccustomed to this intimate gesture. He wanted to reach out his hand to take it, but found that his fingers were covered in sticky medical culture fluid. After hesitating for a moment, he could only open his mouth awkwardly and awkwardly. Just now, he had briefly described his 1 year of life as a fugitive in the empire. Jian Shuier held her chin and blinked her big and bright watery eyes. She asked curiously, if that genius princess whose name shook the universe is my sister, then what kind of person is she? What does she look like? Is she beautiful? Was this a woman? After knowing that the princess was her own sister, the first thing she cared about was whether she was beautiful or not. Su Lu was silent, and for some reason, he shivered. He said in a low voice, she looks pretty, but she's not a beauty. As for the rest, let's not talk about it. Whenever I think of this princess, I feel a little scared. You haven't seen her, so naturally, you can't imagine how cruel the most terrifying humanoid weapon in the universe can be once she opens fire. Have you contacted us one? I have an important piece of information here that needs to be delivered to the president. He turned his attention and asked, it seems to be very important information. You don't even trust the frontline command. That's not it. It's mainly a matter of authority. The only ones who can decide this matter are the president and those old men on Parliament Hill. Jian Shuier suddenly thought of the storm that had been causing a lot of trouble in the military camp recently. She fell silent, but looking at the exhausted Su Lu in the healing pod, she didn't say anything in the end. She just thought silently, for you, the frontline command does seem to be untrustworthy. In the bloody light that filled the sky, a large Federation battleship slowly broke through the red clouds. Rolling up a powerful airflow, it slowly descended toward the forward base on Planet Yellow Disaster. The people of the Empire in the surrounding ruined cities poked their heads out of the empty windows and welcomed its arrival with eyes full of hatred and indifference. Meanwhile, the countless soldiers of the Federation in the circular base were welcoming it with the most enthusiastic cheers. Accompanied by the Major General and the Captain, Su Lu, who had already changed into a brand new Federation Colonel uniform, walked out of the battleship while facing countless burning gazes and vigorous military music. Then, there was a sudden silence. Right at this moment, the cheers and military music stopped abruptly. Only the foreign evening breeze gently blew the Federation flag above the base. A deep voice shouted, "Salute!" The densely packed Federation soldiers standing around the battleship were wearing dark green military uniforms. After hearing the order, they collectively stood at attention, raised their right arms, and gave the most standard and enthusiastic military salute to Su Lu below the battleship. Hearing the sound of military uniforms rubbing against each other clearer than the sound of the wind, looking at the rows of straight arms, Su Li's body was a bit stiff. He stood there in a daze, feeling a bit numb and itchy on his face. It wasn't because the burns on his face were healing, but because the blood had rushed up. The commander of the new 17th Division, Yu Qinghai, stood at the front of the welcoming team. After Su Lu saluted, Commander Yu patted his shoulder lightly and didn't say anything. Then, Su Lu was faced with an ocean of warm hugs. The officers came, the members of Group 7 also came. Da Vinci, that brat, actually cried until his eyes turned red. It seemed that the son of the governor was still so sentimental. He didn't know if he had married Gao Lu's sister. Regiment Commander He Lei, Mecha Team Leader Hua Xiaoxi, Lin Ai, Gu Shifeng. These men in the military hugged him warmly and patted his back with all their might. Countless excited faces kept swaying in front of him. But why did he feel like something was missing? Where was Jiewen? Su Lu searched for that charmingly naive face in the crowd. Group 7 only had a pair of twin brothers. GSC sacrificed himself beside stream 3320. Could it be, where are Old White and Big Bear? Su took off his already messed up military cap and asked softly. Following his question, the jubilant welcoming ceremony suddenly became incomparably quiet. Chapter 662. The surroundings were silent. Su vaguely guessed that something bad was going to happen. A complicated expression flashed across his pale and haggard face. His eyes gradually narrowed as he felt a wave of fear in the depths of his heart. He was truly afraid because it was too easy to die on the battlefield. When he was fleeing for his life in the Empire, he had felt a faint sense of panic in his heart. If he was really lucky enough to make it back, would he still be able to see the faces of those people? If the familiar military camp lost those familiar faces and the familiar smell of their feet, would it still be the same military camp as before? What was even more frightening was that he wasn't there when those people left. He didn't know how they left, but they left forever. In literature, it was often said that things were the same, but people were different. It was probably this kind of experience that wasn't very strong, but was exceptionally sorrowful. The quiet environment caused Su to constantly think of the worst possible scenario. The heroic scene of Bai Yulan, Xiong Linquan, and the others dying in battle appeared in his mind. At this moment, He Lei pushed the person in front of him away and whispered into his ear, telling him everything that had happened. A long silence. The crowd was silent from the inside to the back. After understanding what had happened, Su Li's expression didn't change much. Instead, his pair of clear little eyes narrowed more and more. He didn't make any intense reactions. He only tightly pursed his thin lips, narrowed his eyes, and looked at the base in front of him in the twilight, not saying a word. In the deathly stillness around the base, countless densely packed Federation soldiers quietly looked at him, also not making a single sound. The military discipline incident caused by Yulan had recently caused a lot of commotion in the military camp. Although the military court had already made the final verdict, everyone in the base knew, or rather hoped, that something would happen after confirming that Colonel Su had returned alive. Apart from the new 17th Division and Iron 7th Division soldiers, most of the soldiers who had participated in the battle maintained a neutral stance on this matter. They were more interested in what kind of sparks would erupt between the two when Su met Du Shaoqing again. Would Bai Yulan be executed? How would the military and even the Federation decide? What kind of person was Du Shaoqing? How iron-blooded was the Iron 7th Division? If it was any other colonel, no one would think that they had the qualifications to negotiate in front of Division Commander Shaoqing. However, this colonel was different because he was Su Lu. 3 years ago at the training base, countless people were fond of talking about the confrontation and the subsequent breakout of the camp. The new 17th Division, the 7th Group, and the Iron 7th Division, as well as the grudge between Su Lu and Du Shaoqing, had long spread to all the military camps of the Federation. This kind of expectation might seem a little unkind. However, the troops within the Empire's borders had to train and fight every day, and people died. Why would the soldiers who were not involved care so much? Yes, he was a hero of the Federation who had returned from the Empire after going through untold hardships. Everyone admired him, but it was precisely because of this that they were able to see a hero of the Federation who had just returned explode. How exciting would it be? All the soldiers of the Federation knew of Colonel Su Li's stone-like, silent, and resolute personality. Seeing him silent in the middle of the field, they believed that he would immediately explode from his silence. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, and also contrary to the members of 7th Group who were waiting with wide eyes for Su Li's order to activate their mecha and break into the military prison to rescue the prisoners, Su Li did not express anything. He only lowered his head slightly to look at the black soil beneath his feet and said softly, "It's fine as long as there are still people alive." New 17th Division Technical Director, Su Lu, reporting to you. Come in, Colonel. The Federation's frontline commander, General Yi Changtian, laughed loudly and patted Su Li's shoulder forcefully, not hiding the strong admiration on his face. When the orderly brought over the tea, he said gently, "The X-3 attack plan is temporarily suspended. The troops are currently resting and reorganizing. Tomorrow or the day after, there should be officials from the Bureau of Proclamation and the Internal Affairs Department to listen to your report, of course, don't mind it. This is routine procedure. Go and rest early. There is no need to come here to stand at attention. As a soldier, military affairs naturally come first. Su took out a microchip from the seam of his belt and placed it in front of Commander E. He continued, General, while escaping, I have already sent back some information, and this electronic document should be the greatest achievement I have achieved in the Empire this year. Seeing Su Li's serious expression, Commander E frowned and picked up the microchip. He asked, What is this? This is a cooperation agreement with the Empire's underground resistance organization. Su explained, At the time, I was unable to report to them, so I had no choice but to act on my own accord and sign this agreement. Hearing this explanation, Commander Yi's expression immediately turned serious. The Federal forces had already conquered 3 of the Empire's administrative star systems. Although they were all remote administrative planets and the Empire's population was not that large, as the occupying party, the Federal forces had already expended too much energy in order to maintain the operations of the occupied planets. As the Supreme Commander of the Federation's frontline, he naturally knew just how great the benefits would be if the Empire's underground resistance organization was willing to cooperate with the Federal forces. Let me look at the content first. The general waved his hand to interrupt Su Li's report and stared intently at the screen on the workbench. After a long time, the general raised his head and rubbed the space between his brows, looking at Su Li's face that did not show any trace of arrogance. He sighed. Who would have thought that not only would you be able to come back alive, you would also bring back such an important document? You rascal, looks like you're going to get another purple merit medal. What do you mean by acting on my own accord? Don't worry, no one in the Federation dares to make a fuss about this kind of boring procedure. As for the details of the cooperation agreement, we'll naturally leave it to the professionals to handle. In fact, the Department of Defense has always had plans in this regard. It's just a pity that our forces have never come into contact with these forces. Colonel Su, I must remind you that perhaps the mission of contacting the other party in the future will fall on your shoulders. I will definitely complete the mission. Su Li's reply was not loud, but it was exceptionally resolute. Then he continued, Other than that, I have also found some technical information in the Empire, information on the mechanical structure of the new Wolf Fong mecha. Commander E was stunned. Less than 2 years after the Federation had broken through the difficult problem of the dual-engine structure and successfully developed the MX mecha, the Empire had developed a new generation of Wolf Fong mecha. Although the Empire's new mecha used an integrated microengine and complex system, making its overall power output far inferior to the Federation's, the new Wolf Fong mecha's high-speed mobility had dealt a heavy blow to the Federation mecha forces on the surface battlefield. The old general forcibly suppressed the excitement in his heart, and looking at Su Li's face, he said in a low voice, The forward finger forces would like to request for a reward for you. However, right at this moment, Su Li did not continue on this topic. Narrowing his eyes, he said something completely unrelated and somewhat abrupt. By Yulan, Xiong Linquan. They are my soldiers. Commander Yi Shangqian's expression was extremely solemn, even faintly tinged with a hint of anger. He stared into Su Li's eyes and asked slowly and coldly, Are you planning to use the information in your hands to threaten the troops? Su Li remained silent. Don't forget, you are a soldier. Commander Yi slapped the long table in front of him heavily, pointing at his nose as he reprimanded angrily. Faced with the fury of the Federation's highest frontline commander, Su Li's expression remained calm. He said in a low voice, I have not forgotten that I am a soldier. That is why when I found out that my subordinates were about to be executed, I did not flip out in front of tens of thousands of soldiers. I controlled my emotions and came to report, and I also handed over all the relevant military intelligence back to the troops without missing a single detail. However, the structure of the Wolf Fong mecha and some data on the Empire's fleet were things I won from a bet with a certain Imperial Highness with my own life. General, I have not forgotten that I am a soldier, and I have not forgotten to prioritize work before personal matters. We've finished discussing work. I would like to talk about personal matters now. The two of them are my soldiers. This is my personal matter. Commander E looked at Su Lu expressionlessly and asked, if your soldiers were executed according to military law, would you dare to hide this so-called personal information and not hand it over? Even if you know that if you say it out loud, our soldiers will not die on the battlefield in the future? Su Lu stared at the dark wooden table in front of him, asking himself this question in the depths of his heart. After a long silence, he answered somewhat tiredly, no. I know you won't, because you are Su Lu. Commander E patted his shoulder as if comforting a junior, and after a short pause, said, Xiong Linquan can be released immediately, but Bai Yulan cannot. Neither you nor I have the right to defy the military court's decision. Thank you for suspending the execution that day. I hope you can give me a few more days. After all, they are my soldiers. I need to think of something, Su Lu replied seriously. Su Lu, I have to warn you. As one of the big shots in the military, Commander E knew very well what kind of shocking things this young officer in front of him had done in the Federation. He said seriously, this is the forward operating base. This is the military, not the Husk Institute, not Hushan Road, and definitely not the S2 Foundation building. If you dare to defy military orders, you know what will happen. Su Lu nodded silently, stood up, and saluted. Then he turned around and left with his wrinkled military cap. If you want a presidential pardon, you have to get the Iron 7th Division and Shaoqing to agree first, Commander E said casually as he sipped his tea with his head lowered. Su Lu, who was walking out of the door, slightly curled his lips and smiled. The military plan to attack the X-3 system was severely disrupted and had to be rearranged. Therefore, the soldiers in the base welcomed another period of boring days of waiting for battle. But for many people, this period of intermission would definitely not be boring, because they were sure that there would be a big show to be played out. For the members of the first 7 teams, who were distributed among the various combat units, they were naturally not in the mood to sit back and watch a show. They were overjoyed at the miraculous return of their leader, but at the same time, they were deeply worried about the future of Lao Bai's gun. The members of the first 7 teams, who had calmed down, realized that their leader, who was capable of splitting mountains in half, was actually unable to pick up the Carlin rotary autocannon and sweep everything away when faced with the strict military discipline and the judgment of the military court. With the leader's contributions, it shouldn't be a problem to ask the president for a pardon. Gu Shifeng held the wine bowl with her chubby fingers and frowned as she analyzed. The key is the attitude of the Iron 7th Division and Division Commander Shaoqing. Division Commander Shaoqing is deeply trusted by the President and the Parliament. His prestige is extremely high. If he doesn't agree, Su Lu gently put the wine bowl in his hand on the table. After a moment of silence, he said, I'll let him order. Chapter 663. Xiong Linquan was let out. This rough and burly man had been obediently squatting beside Su Lu, drinking in large gulps. Beside his thigh that was thicker than a tree was a big gun that was almost as thick as his thigh. When he heard the seemingly boring but actually valiant words from the boss, his eyes immediately lit up. It was as if he had returned to the S1 training base 3 years ago. The old members of Team 7 who had experienced that all smiled knowingly and raised their glasses in celebration. Although the new members who had just joined in the Westwoods didn't understand what the old guys were laughing about, they could hear the firm confidence in the boss's words. Their moods relaxed. Team 7's gathering finally returned to the main topic. They were welcoming back their small-eyed, bad-tempered boss who was like a rock in a toilet. The team members followed their habit of flattering and toasting. Su Lu drank bowl after bowl. His face was smiling, but his mood was getting heavier and heavier. All the team members had come to toast. He counted the heads, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't count them all. Of the original group of more than 10 old members, only 7 were left. Lan Xiaolong had left and the rest had died. As for the new members who came later, those hedonistic sons with powerful backgrounds, so many of them had also been sacrificed. It was a big drink because he had something on his mind. Su Lu sobered up very quickly. When he woke up, Most of the members of Team 7 had already returned to their respective camps. Because of Su Li's return, the higher-ups had specially allowed them to come and have a drink, but they couldn't stay for long. Only De Xiong, Gu Shifeng, Ho Xiandong, and a dozen other members were left in the quiet room. These members were the independent team members that Su Li had been in charge of in the new 17th Division before he left. Why haven't you returned to the division yet? Be careful that Teacher Yu doesn't kick you to death. Su Li took the clear water Da Vinci handed him and drank it in one gulp. He looked at Gu Shifeng and smiled. My supervisor is Lin Ai. He knows where I am, so he wouldn't dare to make a fart. All right, boss. Commander He Lei and Hua Xiaoxi said that they want to drink with you at noon tomorrow. Gu Shifeng's eyes darted around. While she was talking, her fingers took out a small chip from her clothes and sneakily handed it to Su Lu. Seeing his expression, the members of Group 7 reacted quickly. Immediately, two of them walked out of the door to stand guard. Ho Xiandong immediately activated the anti-eavesdropping device in the room. These are the orders of the 1st Regiment of the 7th Division in the South District of Fargar City. The orders for half a month before the attack are all in here. Gu Shifeng lowered her voice and said, when the military court was trying Lao Bai's case, they pulled out this schedule. That day, I thought of a way to remotely steal a copy. What's wrong with this sequence? Su Li knew very well that Gu Shifeng's computer skills were far above his own. Seeing him so serious, he frowned and said, does Dongfang Yu really dare to set a trap? In any case, the military court didn't find anything wrong, Gu Shifeng said. Xiong Linquan growled angrily, then why are you so fucking serious? But I suspect that this sequence has been modified by someone. Even if the 1st Regiment of the 7th Division deliberately let the Empire people in, we have no evidence. Modifying the sequence requires a very high level of authority. I have already obtained the sequence head of the sequence. Gu Shifeng looked at Su Lu and said, Boss, as long as we can get the Bureau of Proclamation to investigate, they will definitely be able to find out if anyone tampered with it. Su Lu knew that Gu Shifeng, who had an IQ of 230 but couldn't get into 1st Hospital, might have guessed something. After a moment of silence, he stared at the chip in his hand and asked Xiong Linquan, tell me the details of the attack that day. The situation at the time was like this. Xiong Linquan's voice was low. The 7th Division can totally say that the Empire's broken team and the mecha used a loophole in their defense, but we have no evidence. He looked at Su Lu and said with a strange expression, Boss, the key is that I don't think the East has the guts to do this. Although the Ice Demon is disgusting, he is not that kind of person. In the entire Federation, only the soldiers of the new 17th Division dared to call Du Shaoqing an Ice Demon. But Old Bai insists that there is a problem. Although there is no evidence, I trust Old Bai's intuition on the battlefield, Ho Xiandong said with a frown. I also believe it, Su Li said softly as he stared at the chip in his hand. There was a light knock on the door, and a young officer walked in. He was still dressed neatly on the battlefield, and he had a quiet smile on his face. Back in the day, he was the ace student of 1st Hospital's motor department. He was only second to Tai Ziyuan in the tactical deduction of the entire military assessment. He was Zhou Yu, a soldier from the West Woods who had led the officers to resist the Iron 7th Division's defense battalion. Today, he was an important person in the Iron 7th Division staff department. But no matter what, he had been Su Li's assistant in the Nutshell Engineering Department, and he had also been his student. I smoked in the Empire, but the problem is that it wasn't as suffocating as the 37 brand. Su Lu leaned against the bed and took a deep drag of his cigarette. He smiled at Zhou Yu and said, Teacher Shaoqing appreciates you, so you don't have to feel pressured. I'm just worried that the madam at the back of the mountain will be angry. I'm just a nobody. I'm not like you. I don't have the right to make the madam angry. Zhou Yu leaned against the wall and lowered his head to take small puffs of his cigarette. He smiled with some difficulty and said, Actually, you should know very well that life on the battlefield is completely different from life in the Federation. Although the Xiao Shu Foundation paid for my university education and I've signed an agreement with them, I'm always busy deducing tactical plans with the teacher. How could I think about such things? Su Lu nodded, waving the cigarette in his mouth in front of him. If you want the teacher to agree to pardon by Yulan, you should at least watch your words. Zhou Yu took a deep drag of his cigarette, threw it to the ground, and stamped it out. He raised his head and said seriously, I don't know why. You're so gentle in front of us, in front of everyone, but why are you so arrogant in front of the teacher? Su Lu took the cigarette away from his mouth with his finger and said with a smile, It's not like you don't know my bad temper. Seeing your teacher's attitude gives me a headache. Like to pressure people? I just want to bounce back. It's just a habit, a habit? Zhou Yu smiled helplessly and said, Don't forget, our teacher is also this kind of person. He values military discipline the most in his life. If someone wants to use external pressure to force him to give up on some of his principles in life, his reaction will be very strong. As he said this, Zhou Yu did not know that on a certain rainy day 1 year ago in the capital, Du Shaoqing, who had adhered to his principles for half his life, had sadly given up on some things. But in the past, I've never seen him really bounce back even though I've been pressuring him for half his life. Su Lu looked at the slowly burning cigarette in front of him, and suddenly thought of that middle-aged man he had not thought of for a long time. But the problem is that the Federation only has one Zhong Suahu, and he's already dead. So now no one can pressure your teacher? Su Lu asked with narrowed eyes. You know that's not what I mean. After a moment of silence, Zhou Yu said, The situation now is very different from before. Ever since you went missing, the Iron 7th Division has expanded to more than 40,000 people, more than 600 MX mechas, it's above all other combat units. In this 1 year, the President, Parliament Hill, the Ministry of Defense, and the various military regions have all trusted our teacher. As for the feelings the people have for him and the Iron 7th Division, it can be described as love and respect. He smiled bitterly and said, Although our teacher hates this atmosphere very much, this is the truth. Federation hero, military idol, Su Lu said. Believe me, I'm very familiar with this kind of procedure with the 7th Division. No, the Iron 7th Division's current position is built on the teacher's command, the soldiers' lives, and their dazzling battle records. Zhou Yu stared into his eyes and said seriously, The only one who can compete with us is your teacher. Because teacher Yu Qinghai is unwilling to sacrifice too many people, his battle records are far inferior to ours. Teacher Yu is wise. Zhou Yu rubbed his hair painfully and said, Let's put it this way. Old Bai dared to tear off Dongfang Yu's ear, but you can ask him if he dares to do the same to teacher Shaoqing. In this world, only you dare to do it now, but you must not be impulsive. Su Lu was silent for a moment, then carefully extinguished the cigarette completely. Then he suddenly got up from the bed. Zhou Yu asked in shock, What are you doing? I'm going to see Du Shaoqing. The Iron 7th Division was known for its strict military discipline, and the Iron 7th Division's defense battalion was known to be the only unit in the Federation that could truly ignore Luling. However, as long as teacher Shaoqing gave the signal, they would all jump into Luling without hesitation, regardless of life and death. It was such a unit that was filled with an iron-blooded and austere aura. When they saw Colonel Su Lu, who was wearing a brand new military uniform and had a faint smell of alcohol on him, appear in front of the door, their expressions couldn't help but become a little complicated and strange. Although their slightly changed expressions quickly returned to their ice-cold indifference, this already showed that Su Li's arrival had caused some sort of psychological impact on the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division. It was probably because this seemingly ordinary colonel in front of them was the only person in the entire Federation that could make their teacher not go crazy. Moreover, this person had once provided extremely valuable help to the Iron 7th Division in 5460. The expressionless Shimin Jin invited Su Lu in. In the somewhat dark room, there was a large flat electronic map hanging on the wall. The famous general of the Federation had his hands behind his back. His body was slightly bent as he carefully studied every detail on the map. Under the changing light, a few strands of white could be faintly seen on his shoulders that looked like they were carved out by a knife, and between his meticulous hair that was pressed down by a military cap, a few strands of white could be faintly seen. Please sit. Please have some tea. Ordinary jasmine tea. The tea that I made. Du Shaoqing didn't turn around. His voice was still cold and calm, but the words that came out of his mouth made the people who walked into the room feel incomparably shocked. Shimin-jin looked at the steaming hot cup of tea on the table and thought with a frown, when had the teacher ever said the words please to a subordinate officer in his life? Who had the teacher personally made tea for in his life? Mr. President had never drunk it before. Chapter 664. Sulu also didn't expect to receive such courtesy. After a slight pause, he saluted the back of that figure. Sitting at the table, he picked up the cup of ordinary jasmine tea and seriously drank a few mouthfuls. Du Shaoqing turned around and waved his hand to have Shimin-jin and the other Iron 7th Division officers leave the room. He walked to the table, removed his iconic sunglasses, took off his military cap, and sat down. The two of them sat on opposite sides of the table and calmly looked at each other. There were no sparks where their gazes met, nor were there any flashes of swords whistling through the air. There was only silence. After not seeing each other for some time, Sulu noticed that Du Shaoqing's sideburns were already visible. That cold, proud, and strict face of the past that was like an ice sculpture also showed some fatigue and haggard. In the past few years of life on the battlefield, especially in the recent months of the expedition to the Empire, for the undefeated legend of the Iron 7th Division, for the continuous victories of the Federal forces, Division Commander Du Shaoqing had spent a great deal of effort. However, Sulu still couldn't get used to this kind of tired and haggard expression appearing on his face. Du Shaoqing's eyes drooped slightly. He picked up the cup of coffee that had just been prepared by the orderly and took a light sip. He then very casually said, "Slow down the death sentence." Sulu was silent for a moment. He picked up the cup of jasmine tea that Shimin-jin had personally brewed and took a big gulp. He raised his head, looked into Shimin-jin's eyes, and said, "No." Du Shaoqing put down the cup of coffee. He didn't continue to make things difficult for Shimin-jin and instead changed the topic. He looked at Su Li's scarred face and said, 3 years ago in the base, we once discussed whether what the army needed was discipline and tactics or a strong individual. I said that there was only one god of war in the universe, and you said no. Now it seems that you have proven to a certain extent that you can do some things that ordinary people can't do. However, I still gave the same answer. If you died, what would happen to the army? Du Shaoqing continued, you miraculously survived and returned with great contributions. Everybody in the Federation, from the president to the vendors, has to show you some respect. But I, Du Shaoqing, have never been someone who would give face to others. I don't need to give face to others. I understand the importance of military discipline. He looked up at Du Shaoqing and said, but I believe that Bai Yulan is not a reckless person. He must have his reasons for doing so. There is no reason that can explain this. Du Shaoqing said, I've paid attention to Bai Yulan before, and I know that he's an extremely outstanding soldier. You could even say that he's an extremely rare soldier, but I've never thought of transferring him to my unit, because I know very well that people like him, like you, and like your team members, people like this are not true soldiers at all. He went against his superiors, tore off Dongfang's ear, and even cut that crispy meat into 16 pieces. He personally cut off his own path of retreat. Du Shaoqing stared into Su Li's eyes, and his voice gradually became cold. You haven't been a first-class military officer, but you should know very well what this means. If it was one of my men who did such a thing, I definitely wouldn't plead for mercy on his behalf. I would just shoot him to death. I'll repeat myself. I believe that my men definitely wouldn't do such a thing for no reason. Su Li had no intention of backing down. He stared back into Du Shaoqing's eyes and said word by word, Teacher Shaoqing? When the words Teacher Shaoqing came out of his mouth, it sounded exceptionally stiff. It was as if the bones of a cow that had been dried up for thousands of years had jumped out piece by piece from a crack in the dry wasteland. Although it was only 4 words, the two of them knew very well what Su Li's unspoken words were, and what he wanted to emphasize. Gradually, dark clouds gathered between Du Shaoqing's sword-like eyebrows. He said coldly, in the army, discipline is the most important thing. In the Federation, law is the most important thing. Secondly, evidence is the most important thing. Colonel Sulu, I respect the verdict of the military court, and I will do whatever it takes to protect the military discipline of the army. I absolutely believe that my men wouldn't do the things that you're imagining. If you have evidence, please submit it to the Internal Affairs Department or the military court. If you don't, please go back. After hearing these clean and exceptionally unyielding words, Su Lu furrowed his brows and suddenly said, Teacher Xiaoqing, perhaps you don't understand your men as well as you imagine. Looking at the white hair at the temples of this famous Federation general, he felt something in his heart. This person worked hard for the Federation, and it could even be said that he burned his own life. However, the arrogance and conceit in his bones still didn't change at all. People are all complicated. Su Lu looked into Du Xiaoqing's eyes and said, Someone once told me that humans are the first order of machines. Under your training and command, the 40,000 soldiers of the Iron 7th Division are as efficient and powerful as machines, but, in the end, humans are not true machines. People like Commander Dongfang are no longer the little soldiers under your command. He has his own thoughts. Completely and unconditionally trusting your subordinates is a virtue, but it is also a risk. No one knows if someone will take advantage of this trust. Du Xiaoqing's eyes narrowed, and a cold light shot out. If Su Lu was trying to sow discord with his words, it would be too stupid, so he knew that the other party was speaking very seriously about this issue. When the aroma of coffee gradually wafted through the air, he couldn't help but think of that rainy day in the capital, that subordinate he once trusted the most. His gaze naturally drifted outside the room. Du Xiaoqing glanced at the back of Shiminjin in the distance, and his mood was exceptionally cold. It was probably because of this extremely complicated emotion that he didn't want to cast doubt on another of his most loyal subordinates. There's no need to talk about this matter anymore. Du Xiaoqing waved his hand to stop Su Lu from speaking. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, There's something I have to tell you. I still don't appreciate your undisciplined and heroic style, but right now, I really do admire you a bit. Su Li's gaze lowered. He stared at the gently rippling jasmine petals in the cup in front of him and understood the other party's meaning. With Du Xiaoqing's temperament, there was no way he would discuss this extremely simple military discipline issue with him for such a long time. Regardless of whether it was this cup of tea Du Xiaoqing personally brewed or the words reprieve that came out of the other party's mouth at the very beginning, it wasn't Du Xiaoqing giving Su Lu face. Instead, it was a Federation soldier showing respect to another fairly decent Federation soldier. Su Lu stood up, put on his hat, saluted, and said his goodbyes. In the end, he said in a heavy voice, In tomorrow morning's battle meeting, I will request for this case to be reopened. Du Xiaoqing didn't reply, nor did he stand up, only casually waving his hand. However, when he saw Su Li's figure walk out the door, a rare hint of complicated and lonely emotions appeared in this Federation young great general's eyes. Tea and conversation, this was a form of respect between soldiers, as well as a form of gratitude. Thank you for risking the Empire's life, for killing Keaton, for avenging the tiger, as well as for her half a kilometer away from the new 17th Division's camp, at the corner of a quiet metal tunnel escape door. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked in that direction. With a low voice, he said, You can come out. There were no immortals, demons, ghosts, or even unexpected beauties jumping out from there, running onto his body, wrapping themselves around his neck to give him a passionate hug. There was only an old butler wearing a black formal suit that silently appeared in his eyes. To be more precise, it appeared in the region of his brain that was in charge of vision. Under the base's light breeze, Su Lu turned around and leaned against the secluded metal plate. He closed his eyes and stared at the butler in the darkness. For some reason, he felt like this image's wrinkles seemed to be much fewer than a few years ago. He subconsciously asked a rather strange question that both sides understood. We're still you? This type of feeling is a bit strange, but I am still me. Also, long time no see, Colonel Su. This is a greeting sent out on behalf of the other me. Su Lu sighed. He didn't have the energy to discuss the philosophical questions of whether or not consciousness and intelligence could be split. He reported the data that Gu Shifeng had stolen and said, I'll have to trouble you to help me check whether or not this military order table has been tampered with. After a short while, The Federation Charter computer replied, "This order table has been tampered with. The data of the 34 military orders between the standard time 9 to 887 and 9 to 992 has been covered." Su Lu calculated the time. It was the few days before Bai Yulan and the others were attacked in the southern part of Fargar City. His tightly closed eyes couldn't help but tightly knit together. His hands that were hanging by his waist gradually relaxed. He took out a 37 brand cigarette from his pocket, lit it up, and lightly smoked. A trace of a smile appeared on his face. "Help me get the original data back?" "I can't." "Why?" "Because this is the real-time battlefield order table. According to wartime regulations, the relevant data is temporarily stored in the command center's data box for easy access at any time, and then sent back to S1 within the standard time. What does this have to do with getting the data back? The original data didn't have time to be sent back to S1 before it was completely destroyed by 3 levels of authority. Where did the authority come from? S1 was remotely operated by the Bureau of Proclamation. Su Lu suddenly opened his eyes and immediately thought of the information that he sent back before he went to the Empire. The reason why the seed of the Empire that destroyed the ancient bell was able to escape from the purge of the Bureau of Proclamation must be related to the Bureau of Proclamation. He narrowed his eyes, took a deep breath of the cigarette, and asked in a low voice, "The thing that I asked you to help me with before I came back, how is it going? Also, what's the result of the case that the Federation investigated a year ago?" "The seed of the Empire is named Hiyuyu. According to the information you obtained from the Empire and the relevant information, the conclusion is that this person can't access the confidential flight data related to the ancient bell. This person can't access the missing data of the charter network. The result of the case a year ago is, Assistant Director Chui Zhedong was investigated, not guilty. Deputy Director Jiao Shouhen committed suicide." Su Lu took off the cigarette and licked his bitter lips. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the foreign sky outside the base. Looking at the dark clouds, his heart became heavy. "Boss, how's the discussion?" Xiong Linquan, Da Vinci, and the rest of the team members came over and asked with anxious expressions. Su Lu woke up, put out the cigarette and said, "Du Shaoqing didn't agree to let him go. Then what should we do?" Everyone was extremely disappointed. Xiong Linquan said in a low voice, "Boss, do you want to go and see Old Bai?" "No, after Old Bai came out, I saw him as a flower." Su Lu thought of the revised military order and spat. "Now we don't need Du Shaoqing to agree." Countless dark clouds were floating in the sky, blocking out the beautiful sunlight and casting a shadow that chilled one's heart. Su Lu also had countless dark clouds in his heart. The death of Secretary Jiao, the result of the investigation of Chui Zhedong, the powerful soldier who assassinated Little Watermelon, and the undercurrent in the military that Tiger mentioned in the West Woods restaurant. There were countless scattered details that couldn't be connected, but gradually gathered together and pointed to a chilling conclusion. If the attack on the ancient bell was really a conspiracy of some big shots in the Federation, how did they do it? Secretary Jiao's death seemed to have completely cut off this clue. Where to start the investigation? Bai Yulan's group had been ambushed. If this was another move by the radical faction of the military, why would they do this? Was it simply to cut off the influence they had left behind? Also, was Du Shaoqing involved in this? Was the lady in the back mountain involved? How many people in the government were involved in this ugly thing? The central computer of the Federation was not omnipotent in the face of the rain clouds that had an unknown number of layers, thickness, and darkness. The old guy could comb through the enormous database and retrieve the data accurately, pinpointing who had met and talked to whom in a certain place on a certain date. However, because of the citizen privacy regulations that were strictly protected by the first charter of the Federation, there was no way to restore a lot of information other than electronic data. Society was an extremely complex system. A person had to meet countless people every day. When they met, a note, a whisper, or even a look could construct infinite possible conspiracies. This was the simplest form of communication, but it was also the most difficult method for the central computer to monitor. As Feng Yu once said, the simplest is often the most powerful. It was the same for locks, machines, and people. While the old guy continued to search for clues in the huge database, Sulu had to turn his attention back to the base. The impromptu conversation before the morning military meeting was about to determine Magnolia's life and death. According to his military rank, there was definitely no seat for him in the secret meeting room of the Attack X-3 military plan, but he could sit in and listen. The coffee cups in the headquarters were all broken a few days ago, so today there were only teacups on the table. Looking at the steaming white steam in front of him, Sulu narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. His eyes gently fell on Du Shaoqing's figure in front of him. If it was said that he still had respect for Du Shaoqing in the past, then at this moment, this respect had long been covered by the dark clouds. It didn't completely disappear, but it became extremely blurred. Sulu slowly stood up under the gaze of the generals. He was so calm that it made people feel a little strange. He said, "I'm not in a good mood today, so I will try to speak faster. My subordinate, Captain Magnolia, was accused of assaulting her commanding officer and was sentenced to death by military law. I express my strong disbelief in this matter." The atmosphere in the meeting room froze. Everyone, including Commander E, didn't expect Sulu to be so unyielding as soon as he opened his mouth. "What I don't understand is, when my team was placed in a dangerous situation by the Iron 7th Division through shameless and insidious means, and my comrades died tragically, why did Captain Magnolia only tear off one of the ear of the commander of the division?" There was an uproar in the meeting room. Sulu stared at Du Shaoqing's side profile and said, "If it were me, I would never tear off his ear. Instead, I would directly kill him. Colonel Sulu, I hope you can provide the relevant evidence." Du Shaoqing didn't turn around. His fingers gently stroked the edge of his sunglasses as he said lightly. This important military officer didn't threaten anything, but the generals in the meeting room could hear his anger from his words. If Sulu was only venting his anger because of Magnolia, the Iron 7th Division definitely wouldn't let this matter rest. Sulu took out a microchip and handed it to the staff officer beside him. He looked at Du Shaoqing and said, "Commander Du, I remember that during Operation 5460 Glacier, Commander Dongfang Yu was punished by military law for deliberately delaying the rescue of a certain Special Forces 1st Division. Is this person with a criminal record really worthy of your trust?" Without waiting for anyone to speak, Sulu stared at Du Shaoqing and continued, "In less than 2 years, he became a commander again. Doesn't this violate the military appointment regulations? You keep saying that military rules are the most important, but I don't understand. When did Du Shaoqing's words replace military law?" Du Shaoqing raised his eyebrows slightly. His eyes were as cold as ice. He slowly turned his head and stared at Sulu's face without saying a word. It was as if he was looking at a person who was looking for death. Under this gaze, Sulu was like a stone. He didn't feel anything. He narrowed his eyes and said, "You want evidence? I'll give you evidence." "What is this?" Commander Yi Changtian frowned as he looked at the list that kept scrolling on the screen. He asked, "It looks like a command list, but what do the comments on the side mean?" "This is the underlying data." The staff officer on the side suppressed the shock in his heart and explained to the generals in the conference room. Beside it is the analysis result of the Federal Central Computer's data. It is believed that this command list has been altered. The original data has been altered and has been destroyed. This is the command list of the Iron 7th Division's 1st Regiment during that period of time. I don't have the means to completely restore it, but according to the remaining information, I can already see many problems. Sulu looked at Du Shaoqing and said coldly, "I can't judge whether Dongfang Yu's brain has become incomparably stupid from drinking too much on his period, or if he's bold enough to frame an ally. However, because of these illogical orders, the remnants of the Empire's army slipped through your 1st Regiment's defensive zone, and so many of my men died." At this moment, Du Shaoqing's expression was still indifferent and calm, but the corners of his eyes were twitching slightly. Iron 7th Division's Vice Division Commander Lu Sifu stood up and said with a frown, "Is this record authentic? This is determined by the highest authority of the Bureau of Proclamation. Does the 7th Division want to doubt its authenticity?" Su Lu said in a deep voice, "I don't care how you explain it. First, explain clearly to me why the original record of this command list was erased." Lu Sifu's brows were tightly knitted together as he replied slowly, "Ever since the conflict with the Bureau of Proclamation on Planet 5460, everyone has guessed that you have a close relationship with the upper echelons of the Bureau of Proclamation. Who knows if it was you who erased the original record?" And then, Su Li's pupils constricted. He didn't expect the other party to be so shameless. He cursed loudly. This young master was fighting to the death with the Empire at that time. What the fuck did you change? Lu Sifu's body stiffened. Just as he was about to retaliate with a red face, a roar filled with boundless anger rang out in the conference room. Enough. Du Shaoqing smashed the teacup in his hand heavily on the table, causing the porcelain shards to fly everywhere. That right hand behind his back that was bleeding incessantly trembled in anger. His body tensed up as he slowly stood up. His voice sounded like it had been soaked in the blood of the soldiers on planet 5460 for countless years. "Bring Dongfang Yu to me." Chapter 665. There was dead silence in the conference room. Dongfang Pei, the commander of the 1st Regiment of the Iron 7th Division, stood in front of Du Shaoqing. Just like many years ago, he held his head high, straightened his back, straightened his neck, put his legs together, and looked at Du Shaoqing at eye level. His military posture was absolutely perfect, and his bearing was absolutely awe-inspiring. He regarded his commander as an absolute role model, so he would never make the slightest mistake in these aspects. But at this moment his temples were a little wet, and sweat gradually seeped out from the roots of his hair, making his neat hair look a little messy. Du Shaoqing put his hands behind his back. He gripped the black lambskin gloves tightly, and the wounds that had just healed started to bleed again. Looking at the loyal subordinate in front of him who had followed him for many years, he didn't speak. There was no anger on his face, only a strange calmness. His cold eyes fell on Dongfang Pei, as if he was carefully observing a stranger. Dongfang Pei's temples started to sweat even more. Looking at this familiar yet also unfamiliar military officer in front of him, Du Shaoqing thought about his trust in him, his education, and his trust in Shimin Jin. He slightly raised his already weathered face, looking at the military flag on the wall in front of the meeting room. His brows trembled slightly, but he still didn't say anything. However, that tall and straight figure that was like a white poplar tree, in everyone's eyes, seemed to suddenly become a bit desolate and tired. Sweat instantly soaked the back of Dongfang Pei's military uniform, making him feel uncomfortable like sticky rice milk. What made him feel even more uncomfortable was the disappointment that his commander showed at this moment and the strong sense of guilt that suddenly surged in his heart. His right hand subconsciously reached to his waist as if he was possessed, and he took out a cold pistol. "What are you doing?" Regiment Commander Dongfang, put the gun down. The generals in the conference room stood up angrily and anxiously, looking at the pistol in his hand that had a metallic luster of death, and shouted loudly. At the long table, only 4 people saw Dongfang Pei's action and didn't react at all. Commander Yi Changtian, Commander Yu Qinghai, and Su Lu still sat silently. Du Shaoqing stood with his hands behind his back, and there was no trace of expression on his face. Death won't solve the problem. This matter won't end just like that. Su Lu looked at Dongfang Pei's trembling right hand that was holding the pistol and said, "I didn't recover the original records, and the military court won't sentence you to death, but you need to explain why you deleted important data. If you really care about the honor of a soldier, then at the very least, before you commit suicide out of cowardice, you should clearly tell us who in the Bureau of Proclamation actually deleted the data." Although the generals in the conference room were all important figures in the federal military, this matter involved the Bureau of Proclamation. They did not know how to continue the investigation. Even if the Department of Defense were to personally intervene, it would be extremely troublesome. Until they heard Su Li's calm but fierce words, they remembered the strange activation of the charter network on the 3320 and the conflict with the Bureau of Proclamation on the warship. They understood that Su Lu had the determination and ability to get to the bottom of this matter. "I don't understand what you're talking about." Regiment Commander Dongfang Pei glanced at Sulu. His eyes were filled with pride, indifference, and resentment. He did not care about anyone other than his division commander. He turned his wrist, put the muzzle of the gun into his mouth, and pressed the trigger with his finger. At this moment, there was only one person in the entire universe who could stop Dongfang Pei. "I won't allow you to die." Du Shaoqing withdrew his gaze, looked at him and said, "You're not allowed to die before this matter is investigated thoroughly." Hearing his division commander's order, the veins on Dongfang Pei's neck bulged. Sweat flowed down his well-defined jaw like a rainstorm. After some kind of mental struggle, he finally took the gun out of his mouth while breathing heavily. The military police came forward to disarm him, took him out of the conference room, and locked him up. Du Shaoqing turned to Sulu. After a long silence, he said with difficulty, "Sorry, I will give you an explanation for this matter. The crime of tampering with important data is not enough to execute him. Unless we investigate this matter to the Bureau of Proclamation and find out what happened. To be honest, until now, I still don't understand why the Iron 7th Division would do this if someone really wanted to wipe out my influence in the Federation." Sulu had a cigarette in his mouth. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the undeveloped meadow below the base, as well as the scattered flocks of sheep on it. He said, "Maybe Dongfang Pei really didn't know that someone had erased the original data. I think what he said before he wanted to commit suicide was quite true. The problem is that I now doubt whether Du Shaoqing was involved in this matter. The 7th Division used to do undercover work for the government and saw a lot of ugly and dark sides. But if you say that Du Shaoqing was involved in this matter, I don't believe it." A short-haired Federation soldier sat next to him. There was a half-lit 37 brand cigarette between his index and middle fingers. There were no epaulets on his military uniform, and his feet were tightly pressed together in military boots. He was as quiet and gentle as a young girl. Of course, Teacher Du Shaoqing is very capable, but that doesn't mean that he is scheming. The most important point is that he is a very proud person. In fact, he is too proud. He is so proud that he won't allow the slightest stain on his military uniform. Anyway, the case will continue to be investigated. Du Shaoqing kicked Dongfang Pei into our division's NTR team. He will stay there until the investigation is completed. Sulu glanced at him and asked, "I mainly want to see if you are satisfied with this explanation." Dongfang Pei must be living a life worse than death in NTR. What am I not satisfied with? The key is still with the Bureau of Proclamation. Someone has to be responsible for the wrongful death of Xie Wen and the others. Sulu looked at him with the cigarette in his mouth. In the end, he couldn't hold back the question in his heart. He hesitantly reached out his hand and rubbed his short hair. He asked curiously, "Old Bai, why did you shave such an ugly head?" Bai Yulan gently took his hand down and explained softly, "It's not ugly. That's because you're not used to it. I want to see more and see if a flower can really grow on your face." Sulu shrugged and kicked the wet soil under his feet with his military boots. He sighed and said, "It's a pity that you have to leave soon. I really can't do anything about this matter. But wait for a while. I'll use my connections in the department to call you back." Dongfang Pei was thrown into NTR as compensation for the mistakes he had made. The investigation was still ongoing. If he had committed a crime, he would definitely have to pay a higher price. However, Bai Yulan tore off Dongfang Pei's ear in public. Although he wouldn't be shot to death now, and even the confinement was only a symbolic 2 days, in order to maintain the most important military discipline and order in the army, he couldn't continue to stay in the military camp. "I'm not coming back." Bai Yulan said something that shocked Sulu. "When I joined the army, the hair down there wasn't fully grown yet. Don't laugh. This is the truth." He lowered his head and took a deep puff of the cigarette. He said with a hint of self-mockery, "At that time, the old 17th Division hadn't been completely disbanded yet. How early do you think it was? From the 17th Division to the 83-84 Division in Harbor City, and then to the Nutshell Whitewater as a mercenary. There were 7 groups. Finally, I joined the new 17th Division. I've taken a big detour in my life, but I'm always in the army. Training, fighting, killing, fighting, training. Bai Yulan raised her head and looked at him. She blinked and said, "The military camp is my home. I'll miss it when I leave, but I've been here for too long. I'm really sick of it." Bai Yulan rubbed her middle finger and flicked one side of her mouth. She looked with satisfaction at the cigarette but that fell into the grass more than 10 meters away. She continued, "A year ago, when I thought you were dead, I had already submitted a retirement report. However, it wasn't approved. Also, I don't trust the guys in 7 groups, especially the new ones. That's why I followed them to the Empire to keep an eye on them." Sulu was silent. He was thinking hard about how to make her change her mind. "How did you spend the past year in the Empire?" Bai Yulan asked. Sulu didn't mention many details about his year in the Empire. Even when facing the Internal Affairs Department and the Bureau of Proclamation, he didn't mention them. However, Bai Yulan was the one who asked this question. After escaping from Dong Lin, Sulu had always been vigilant about many things and people. After a few years, the people he trusted the most in the Federation were still Shi Qinghai, Zhou Yu, Bai Yulan, and a few others. The biggest gain in the Empire this year was paralysis, a watch, and a mother and son. When these 3 words are put together, and gain at that, it sounds evil. That's because your thoughts are too evil. I've been to the Empire more than once. Bai Yulan's gaze extended from the grass in front of her to the intersection of green and yellow. She frowned and said, "When I was a mercenary in Whitewater, what didn't I do? Therefore, everything here is nothing new to me." "What the hell does this have to do with being new?" Sulu thought about how he was about to leave the army and refused to accept his help. He said angrily, "You don't trust those bastards, but do you think you can leave the army now? This is a war between large armies. What can individuals like us do?" Bai Yulan took the cigarette butt from his mouth and lit another one. She lowered her head and breathed out the smoke. She smiled and said, "And I'm married." Sulu was shocked speechless by this news. After a long silence, he patted his shoulder and said, "Where's the girl from? Is she pretty?" "She's definitely not as pretty as Jian Shuai." Bai Yulan smiled and replied, "You should have seen her before. She's an extremely fierce nurse from the Army General Hospital. Last time, she even scolded you for smoking in the ward." "That's good. Go back. I'll stay and watch over these bastards," Sulu said seriously. Bai Yulan shook her head and said, "You can't watch them. The Federation must be preparing for the press conference when you go back." Sulu was silent. He didn't want to talk about this troublesome topic. Suddenly, he thought of something. He frowned and said jokingly, "De Xiong said that you haven't smoked in the past year because of my death. Isn't that too unmanly?" "Bullshit." Bai Yulan lay back on the meadow and looked at the blue sky with a cigarette in her mouth. She said, "I quit smoking because I want to have children. Hempek? It seems that you're really not a man. The blue sky, the yellow grass, the cloud-like flocks of sheep, and the wisps of 37 brand cigarette smoke." From time to time, 2 people's mocking and calm voices could be heard. Chapter 666. I have never met Colonel Sulu before, but I know him. A few years ago, after Miss Jian Shuai's peace concert in the 4 prefectures turned into a cruel terrorist attack, due to some reasons that haven't been decrypted yet, he and I used to look at the similar scenery on both sides of the road and move towards the same goal. What I could use was the pen in my hand, while what Colonel Sulu used was the gun. Schiller once said that the gun is always more powerful than the pen. After that incident, I happily accepted this conclusion, because when the gun is in the hands of a trustworthy person, it can indeed display a more important and direct power than countless pens. In this corner of the universe that is eternally shrouded in the glory of the Charter, surrounded by news of constant victories on the battlefield, it has been peaceful for too long. As expected, the peaceful and forgetful populace has forgotten many things that happened not too long ago. At this time, the return of Colonel Sulu, at least for me personally, has more meaning. This is an ordinary small-eyed man, but he is too extraordinary. I don't know what kind of childhood experience he had, but he has never been pressured to bow to the darkness in the name of the big picture, never been shaken by the reason of victory. What I am even more puzzled about is, why are there no words like compromise, balance, and exchange of benefits in his dictionary. Compromise, balance, these seem to have become some kind of virtue in this society, but who can tell me who is the one who is compromising with whom? Why do we have to compromise? This ordinary man who didn't like to talk much on the screen used his actions to remind us that in the face of the invaders of the Empire, in the face of the scavengers of the Federation, the people of the Federation have already compromised too much, compromised for too many years. Admiring a person is admiring a certain kind of attitude. I admire Colonel Su Lu precisely because of this kind of uncompromising attitude. He is just like those characters that have appeared in the long river of history. He came from the ordinary populace, like an ordinary stone, but because of the firm ideals in his heart, he is tightly attached to the earth. Usually, he quietly watches the people coming and going from the side of the road, and if someone tries to pass by the side of the road and kick him away, they will be viciously smashed by this stone. It is precisely because of this that Professor Shinyulin's name is engraved on the MX mech of the Federation. It is precisely because of this that the white-haired senator can no longer continue to be his moral peddler. It is precisely because of this that us middle-aged men with dusty hearts will be moved to tears by a documentary. It is precisely because of this that we are fortunate enough to witness the revenge of a nobody from morning till night. We watch that infamous butcher of the Empire turn into a firework in the universe. It is because of this that Commander Zhong and those soldiers under the monument can close their eyes with a smile. Today, I am here to welcome the return of Colonel Su Lu on behalf of all my colleagues in the Zut Special District Daily News. We do not want to use noisy cheers to welcome a legend, a hero, but we want to sincerely welcome back a person who is worthy of the Federation's trust to return to our midst. The Federation welcomes the return of the Road Guardian Stone. Winter of the 71st year of the constitutional calendar, Bob wrote after a silent press conference. On the top floor of the Sanlin United Bank headquarters, an old man wearing a small black round hat sat in an old black round-back chair. He looked at the plant fiber newspaper in his hand, and a smile appeared on his wrinkled old face. As the most trusted media mouthpiece of Mr. President, Bob played a very important role in the Medellin project. I have always admired this person for his courage to speak and hate, completely different from those quails in the newspaper. But I really did not expect that with the return of Su Lu, he could actually write such an article that directly addresses the core of the current problem. Li Xiuzhu looked at his old father, who rarely came to the headquarters for an inspection, and thought that Su Li's return actually alarmed him. He could not help but feel a little strange. The shriveled old man sitting in the black round-back chair was, without a doubt, the real oligarch of the Federation. In the old legends, only the king could be called oligarch, because he was unparalleled in the world. Compared to the so-called financial tycoons who often appeared in the news media, the little old man who had been in charge of the iron calculator for decades, secretly controlled the financial order of the Federation, and only the successive presidents were qualified to be his opponent. What else could he be called if not an oligarch? The font on the front page of the Capital Special District Daily was temporarily adjusted just to put Bob's political article. Li Xiuzhu thought for a moment and said, "Bob's article is a little scattered. Compared with his previous sharp political articles, it is a little worse." Wrong. The old man from Liyuan Palace said in a hoarse and gloomy voice, "This article is obviously not incited by the president. Bob himself only knows that there is a problem with the Federation, but he does not know what the problem is. He knows that Su Lu will have enemies, but he does not know who the enemies are. Of course, he can only make a few obscure sentences. But he said the biggest problem that may arise from Su Li's return to the Federation, which is that this little guy never knows how to compromise." The old man raised his head and looked at Li Xiuzhu with cloudy eyes. He calmly explained, "The situation in the Federation seems to be calm now, but in fact, it could explode at any time. After all, the case of Tiger has not been investigated. When will the case of Westwoods come to a conclusion? I don't know if the attack on the ancient bell was a simple massacre of the Empire or a deeper conspiracy. I don't care about this because if there is a conspiracy, then the people involved in this conspiracy must be very terrifying, so terrifying that I don't even want to care about it." Li Xiuzhu was slightly shocked. He did not expect that even his father would not want to go against that force. As for the case of Westwoods, we are involved, the Lin family is involved, the president's residence, Parliament Hill, everyone is involved in this carnival. Since the Zhong family has collapsed, everyone can get a share of the benefits. Madam has also acquiesced to this carnival some time ago. Naturally, no one wants the case to continue to be investigated and the lawsuit to continue. Now the question is, where is the target of those people? Is it the means they used against the Zhong family when they opened up the Donglin mining area? Or do they want more? They even want what is in the hands of an old man like me? Except for the army, there is no existence in this universe that can fundamentally hurt our family. In the past countless years, we can still live very comfortably without an army in our hands. That is because the Federation has no enemies, so the army is naturally weak. And in the past few decades, with the gradual escalation of the war, the power of the army has become stronger and stronger. Have you ever thought, if the army is in the hands of a person who is very hostile to us, what kind of situation will our families face? Bob's quote is very correct. Money has magic, power has magic, beauty has magic, pen has magic, any extension of human desire can become a powerful tool, but all of these tools are not as powerful as the magic of a gun. Because guns are used to kill, who can resist using death to end all desires? Li Xiuzhu felt that the warm winter sun that shone down from the transparent dome was unable to warm his body at all. He felt waves of cold invading his body. The expensive silk underwear that was smuggled from the Empire's Liban Star was soaked in ice-like sweat. As the CEO of the Sanlin United Bank, he was extremely clear about the complex roots of the family in the Federation society. Sometimes, he couldn't help but sigh in admiration, not understanding how the successive generations of family heads did all of this. Who was the Federation government's biggest creditor? Whose funds did the Ministry of Defense's General Assembly base rely on? How was the purchase of large quantities of firearms realized? Who set the rules of the economic world's numbers game? It was precisely because of this knowledge that he firmly believed that no generation of the Federation government dared to overthrow his family from the roots, because that would inevitably lead to great turmoil and chaos in the entire Federation. It was not an exaggeration to say that the entire Federation's economy would regress by several hundred years because of this. However, if the military's hardliners really did go crazy one day and try to purge the 7 great families, those heavy and cold mechas and brave soldiers would definitely be red-eyed and wouldn't care about these numerical problems. The military, even if those hardliners go crazy, the people behind them are always clear-headed, Li Xiuzhu said with a trembling voice. Moreover, you still have the charter. Charter? The old man from Liyuan Palace laughed hoarsely. His laughter echoed endlessly within the empty bank headquarters building. If the charter was useful, would the 7 great families still exist for so long? The great federal central computer has been bound by the countless rules and regulations created by the 5-person group for tens of thousands of years. It just depends on whether or not you know how to use those rules and regulations. The laughter gradually stopped. The old man from Liyuan Palace gently stroked the armrest and looked at him warmly. Xiaodong's performance these past few years has been quite good. Li Xiuzhu was slightly shocked. He didn't understand why the topic had suddenly changed to his biggest competitor for the family head position. He looked at the old face with shock and bewilderment, resisting the urge to ask. Don't worry. Ever since you met Su Lu, you finally learned to accept failure. Your performance these past few years has been quite good. For now, you are even ahead of your younger brother. The old man warmly said, I admire Xiaotong because he discovered Su Li's value before I did. I suggest that you give full support to any projects that involve Xiaotong and Su Li's relationship. Li Xiuzhu frowned. He didn't understand why Su Lu was mentioned again. The old man from Liyuan Palace gently picked up the plant fiber newspaper in his hand and said in a hoarse voice, regarding the case of the tiger, none of us are willing to continue investigating. This is related to interests. But Bob said that this little guy doesn't have this word in his dictionary, so he will definitely continue investigating. Li Xiuzhu's eyes slightly brightened. He roughly understood what the old man meant. As the war progresses, the strength of the army will only become stronger and stronger. Those tough and cold-blooded generals and the politicians behind them will definitely become more and more greedy. The old man from Liyuan Palace smiled and said, "At this time, we need someone to make them restrain themselves, sober, and understand their role. The war is for the interests of the Federation. It can also be said that it is for our interests, but it can't be for their own interests. I am very worried about Su Li's ability." The brightness in Li Xiuju's eyes gradually disappeared. With a solemn expression, he said, "He is too young to enter the upper echelons of the military. And the most important thing is that Feiqing City has never expressed firm support for him." Hearing the two words Feiqing City, a complicated and strange expression flashed across the old man's face. He seemed to be a little scared, a little sad, and a little relieved. Chapter 667. This was a secret, a very big secret. The old man from Liyuan Palace took a deep breath. His chest, which had become shriveled due to the passage of time, couldn't bounce up as exaggeratedly as a young man's. However, the slightly more ample oxygen allowed his emotions to quickly calm down. This secret only belonged to the few people at the top of the Federation. Since the lady in the back of the mountain had told him, he naturally wouldn't tell anyone else, even if that person was his own son standing in front of him. Philadelphia's support doesn't need to be obvious. The old man coughed a few times and said in a low and hoarse voice, "If my memory isn't wrong, Su Li's net in 3320 a year ago has already revealed the tip of the iceberg of the hidden support. This time, his escape from the Empire was directly confirmed by the central computer as a first-order incident." He looked at Li Xiuju and said with a slight smile, "Have you ever heard of a first-order incident?" Li Xiuju shook his head. His right hand gently rubbed the left side of his chest as if he was still digesting the shock he felt when he first heard this news. "I said before that the charter isn't omnipotent because there are many loopholes in the program that can be exploited. However, most of the time, we can determine a person's power or role through the eyes of the charter. Since the Federal Central Computer believes that Su Lu is so important, then why should I doubt him?" The old man from Liyuan Palace said with a hoarse voice, "To balance the radical faction in the military, he is the best choice. Regardless of whether it is the president or Philadelphia, whether it is the Bureau of Proclamation or the people, they are all endorsing this choice. Right now, my question is, how much power does the radical faction hold?" Li Xiuju asked worriedly. Du Shaoqing doesn't seem to have any political leanings, but who knows what those who have been silently standing behind him think. The old man said in a low voice, "I'm old and don't have enough energy to deal with these things. Tomorrow, represent me to invite a few of my old friends from the mountain conference, and Mr. Security Advisor to hold a banquet." "Is it about the position of chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff?" Li Xiuju said in shock. "I thought the family wouldn't be so involved in politics. The situation is changing. I don't want to be involved, but I'm forced to be involved." The old man from Liyuan Palace laughed lightly and said coldly, "Miles is going to retire. The key position in the military cannot fall into the hands of the radical faction. Regardless of whether it is the 2nd Military Region or the 3rd Military Region, they have to stop their thoughts. Who should we choose? General Li Jiedu." The capital ring was famous for its affluence, and the S1 Capital Special District was naturally the place where the taste of money and power was condensed most vividly. In the suburbs of this city, the political center of the Federation, there were all kinds of high-end private clubs and indescribably luxurious mansions. Countless important decisions that concerned the interests of billions of people in the Federation were often made in these dimly lit, leisurely social places before they were processed by the government or parliament. Located behind the grassy slope to the north of Charter Square, the Lufeng Slope Club, which dared to be the neighbor of the president's official residence, was undoubtedly the top existence among these clubs. However, even this private property in the back of the mountain couldn't take away the dazzling brilliance of Linyuan in these years. Except for the owner of Linyuan, who was gradually becoming a legend, and except for the first time Madman Li and Su Lu met and fought a bloody battle, these kinds of anecdotes that were gradually becoming legends, just the fact that the Federation's god of war, Li Pifu, who rarely left Philadelphia and chose to stay in the capital special district, was enough to support Lin Yuan for decades. Lin Yuan, which usually flowed with gentle background music, was particularly quiet today. The waiters, who usually had a calm expression, couldn't help but have some emotional fluctuations. The senior manager, who usually only watched the guests in the hall indifferently in the office area behind the building, had already come to the hall in person. Sometimes, he glanced at the welcome speech by Chief Editor Bob in the newspaper in his hand, and sometimes, he nervously looked at the bamboo house. Lin Yuan's senior manager rolled the newspaper behind him, looked at the waitresses in front of him, and sternly said, after Colonel Su Lu finished the press conference, he went directly to the official residence to have dinner with the president. So, this noon will be his first private meal after returning to the Federation. It is our honor that he chose Lin Yuan. You must show 100% professionalism. Don't ask for autographs. Show your professionalism. Don't scream, don't whisper. Inside the bamboo house, beside the running water, there was a mahogany table in the middle. The curtain made of green bamboo leaves swayed slightly, and a breeze blew. Su Lu, who was eating to fill his empty stomach because of the ordinary cooking of the First Lady of the Federation, looked up in surprise. A familiar, warm, and cold red entered his eyes. He stood up, very naturally reached out to take the red windbreaker, and casually hung it on the side. Then, he turned his head, slightly leaned forward, and put his hands around her shoulders. They hugged for a long time, and then separated. I originally thought of a lot of things to say to you. Zhou Yu casually pushed her big curly hair behind her back, looked at him with a smile, and patted his thin cheeks gently. She said, but seeing you appear in front of me alive like this, with the same arrogant appearance as before, I feel that those words are unnecessary. No matter what, you can't cherish your life more. Then, it's good that you are alive. We should celebrate. Su Lu nodded in agreement, and said with emotion, indeed, we should celebrate. The exquisite dishes were served one by one, which was basically the same as the countless dinners in Lin Yuan in the past. It was like a reminiscence of the past. The two close friends who had not seen each other for more than a year quietly talked about the stories of each other during this period of time. They drank wine that was not strong but intoxicating. Not long after, there were 5 or 6 empty wine bottles floating in the flowing water. Your return makes many people happy, but also makes many people nervous. Zhou Yu's jade-like fingers gently held the wine cup rippling. She was elegant and charming. 2 completely different kinds of beauty rippled in the same time between her eyebrows. Her beautiful face flashed with her unique sarcastic feeling. That unreasonable guy is back. Their lives will be a little difficult. I never overestimate myself. Su Lu took out a cigarette box and put it on the table. He lit a cigarette. After being stunned for a moment, he didn't know why, but he took out another cigarette and handed it over. He shrugged and said, last time in Bu Mountain Villa, I was able to scare the Lin family away because I had a gun in my hand, and I looked a little fearless. Zhou Yu opened her eyes wide and looked at the cigarette he handed over. She was also stunned, and then she took it, not used to it. Her slender fingers held the cigarette a little stiffly. She said, but the fact is, when people found out that you were still alive, they immediately found out that you started to cause trouble again. When did I cause trouble? Su Lu lit the military metal lighter in his hand and moved closer to her charming red lips. Now, is there anyone who dares to provoke Du Shaoqing? Even the big shots in the military have to avoid this young famous general. But what about you? Zhou Yu took a puff of the cigarette and narrowed her eyes, not used to it. Her delicate eyebrows were furrowed tightly, as if she had drunk a mouthful of strong wine. She choked a few times before she calmed down. She said with a tone of amazement and admiration, "You are really amazing. You actually slapped Du Shaoqing's face as soon as you came back. Magnolia tore Dongfang Pei's ear, but you were able to retire from the army unscathed. Dongfang Pei was sent to the NTR unit. When the news reached the capital ring, I don't know how many big shots were shocked out of their mouths." Amazement and admiration seemed to be 2 completely different emotions, just like beauty and charm, but Zhou Yu had the ability to mix these emotions or tastes together. Sulu had known her for many years, and he had long been used to the headache-inducing cold and contemptuous attitude of this beautiful woman in red from time to time, so he just shrugged and did not say anything. She pointed at Su Li's face with the finger holding the cigarette, and wisps of smoke spread out from between her jade fingers. She was not like those prostitutes who frequented nightclubs. She only said with her unique cold voice, "But this is you. Those old guys now understand that even if you have been missing for more than a year, you are still you." Too much, too much. Sulu swallowed a mouthful of smoke with a glass full of red wine. His chest was full and full. "I don't want the two of us to look like we're acting when we're eating. Besides, my man is dead." Zoe did not seem to like the smell of cigarettes. She frowned and looked at the logo on the edge of the carbon filter. She crushed it hard in the cylinder, looked up and asked in confusion, "This is also something I don't understand." Although the death rate of the NTR unit is as high as 37%, Du Shaoqing is a smart man. He threw Dongfang Pei to the NTR unit of the 17th Division. How could your division commander let Dongfang Pei die in his own unit? Based on your temperament, I thought you would directly kill Dongfang Pei. There is no evidence that Dongfang Pei committed a malicious crime, and there is obviously a problem behind this matter. Sulu was silent for a moment. He looked at the spacious space in the Linyuan and said, "I will find a quieter place to talk to you later. Also, there is a very important reason." He quietly looked at Zhou Yu's beautiful face and said, "When I returned to the base, Du Shaoqing personally made tea and invited me to drink it." Without waiting for me to speak, he directly said the words reprieve. Division Commander Du Shaoqing never gives face to anyone, but this time is different. For the sake of the words reprieve, I have to give him some face. Old Bai wants to retire from the army, so before I find out the truth, I think it is more appropriate to deal with this matter temporarily. Bai Yulan is your most capable assistant. It is really unexpected for him to retire from the army just like that. Zhou Yu was used to thinking from his point of view and was very unhappy about this matter. A man with a wife will naturally have ties. Moreover, Old Bai has worked for the Federation for so many years and has already fulfilled his obligations. No one has the right to ask him to continue to stay at the front line, where he does not know if there will be a tomorrow. Su Lu lowered his head and said with emotion, "The front line is at war. Those guys are struggling to survive in the rain of bullets, but I am drinking red wine and chatting in the Linyuan. This contrast makes me very uncomfortable. I should be with them." "You don't have to feel guilty." Zhou Yu took the cigarette box from the table and played with it. She lowered her eyes and said calmly, "After the X3 military plan ends, the federal forces will stop attacking. Even if you rush back now, it will be meaningless." Su Lu raised his head. His straight and thick eyebrows slowly knitted together. He said in a deep voice, "Cease fire." But Chapter 668. Right now, the Federation has already attacked the X3 star system. According to the Empire's response plan, the bottom line of the strategic retreat is here. If the Federal forces still want to advance as easily as before, they will definitely be met with a crazy counterattack from the Empire. According to the latest intelligence, the princess who has been tormenting you for a year has already led 470 Wolffang mechas to the front lines and is watching the Federal forces through 3 spatial gates, ready to attack at any time. What does the X3 star system have the most? Its crystal ores. For the Federation, the first strategic goal of occupying the star system has already been completed. The troops need to rest and reorganize. Furthermore, the supply line is too long, which is becoming more and more difficult for logistical support. What is the purpose of war? It's profit. You can see war as a business. A business that loses too much money will definitely not last for too long. Zhou Yu played with the cigarette box in her hand and casually expressed her opinion. She raised her head and smiled at Su Lu before continuing. The Department of Defense has already decided that after the X3 military plan ends, there will be a probing attack toward the L star system. According to the results of this battle, the follow-up plan will be decided. However, according to the files I've seen, they will basically choose to stop. Of course, There must be a purpose in war. However, the current situation is very good. If we don't take advantage of this opportunity to expand our gains and allow the empire to catch a breather, we will have to pay an even heavier price if we want to take another step closer to Tianjin. Su Lu frowned and said unhappily, "Yesterday in the official residence, Mr. President didn't reveal any of these thoughts. The military might not get approval to stop the attack. I've already told you that I'm currently working at the Department of Defense's Strategic Research Center, so I have the opportunity to come into contact with these secret files. You have sufficient authority, which is why I'm reminding you. As for the attitude of the president that you all so proudly claim as your own, regardless of whether he is willing to stop the federal forces' advance or not, the current political environment no longer allows him to expand the scope of the war indefinitely." "What political environment?" "The current situation is very good, not very good," Su Lu replied in a deep voice. "You still don't understand?" The crystal mine was the key. At that time, President Pabre was able to get the support of the military and the people. He ignored the opposition of many people in the upper class and ordered the troops to attack the empire. On the one hand, it was because your appearance represented the attitude of the old man in Philadelphia. On the other hand, as a close partner of Mr. President, you successfully influenced the attitude of the parliament and many people. Zhou Yu stared into his eyes and said in an aggravated and somewhat annoyed tone, "Right now, the Federation is about to take down X3. The Crystal Mine Federation will have enough crystal mine resources, and the entire Federation's economy will be greatly boosted because of this. There's no need to worry that the interests of the rear mountain will be fully satisfied. Madam naturally won't spare no effort to support the development of the war. Mr. President is a politician, not a childish military officer like you." When he heard Zhou Yu's simple but unquestionable analysis, Su Li's mood became somewhat downcast. He replied in annoyance, "I'm not a warmonger, and I'm not childish. On the contrary, the decisions of these big shots are as laughable as children playing house. People die in war. How can they stop just because they say so? War will always be an accessory of politics, and politics is a derivative of the economy. The interests of the Federation as a whole, from a certain perspective, are indeed more important than the lives of the soldiers on the front lines. Don't stare at me so fiercely. I grew up in the military compound since I was young, and I hate this situation more than you do. But who can change this situation?" Zhou Yu stared fiercely into Su Li's eyes, not allowing him to express the sense of loss and irritation in his heart. After a long silence, Su Li grabbed the wine cup and took a big gulp. He said in a hoarse voice, "More than a year ago, I had dinner with Mr. President in the official residence. A little earlier, I had dinner with Tiger in the West Woods. I agree with the judgment of the two of them on the current situation. I've been in the Empire for a year, and I've clearly sensed that the Empire, from the nobles to the commoners, has an extreme hatred for the Federation that is difficult to eliminate. I'm not a warmonger, and I don't have extravagant hopes that the Federation can occupy the entire territory of the Empire. However, if this war really isn't going to drag on for 10,000 years, one side will have to beat the other to the point of extreme pain, to the point where they can only surrender, not daring to start another war. If we keep going back and forth like this, stopping and fighting for 2 years when the big shots need it and stopping when they don't need it, how many unnecessary sacrifices will the soldiers on the front line have to make because of this?" He paused for a moment and put down the wine cup very slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible between the bottom of the cup and the table. Then he stared at the rippling red wine at the bottom of the cup, as if he was staring at the blood flowing out of the corpses of the Federation soldiers in a dry riverbed in a foreign land. He said in a low voice, "Now, I suddenly understand why the radicals in the military can silently gain the support of so many people. Let's not talk about the matters on the front line for now." After a moment of silence, Zhou Yu raised the wine cup and gestured in the air. She said, "There are still many problems within the Federation, and you have many personal problems that need to be solved." "What problems do I have?" Su Lu asked in confusion. "Those women of yours." Zhou Yu said mockingly, "Jian Shuier is in the fleet, Shang Qiu is in the engineering department. Oh, and that daughter of the Prime Minister, did she contact you? As for that annoying female revolutionary in the Parliament Mountain, I don't want to mention it. This is my personal problem. Su Lu scratched his head and said helplessly, "Don't forget, you are the father of my son, and the entire Capital Special Region knows about your relationship with my family. As your fiancé, don't I have the right to control how many women you have outside?" Zhou Yu stared at him with a charming smile on her beautiful face. It was supposed to be a joke, but because of the brightness in her eyes, there was a touch of strangeness. "At least, can you not mock Zhang Xiaoming so viciously like Shi Qinghai?" Su Lu spread his hands helplessly and said, "Of course, I know you hate her because you care about me, and I am very grateful for that, but that girl is my first love. Can't you let me keep a clean and beautiful memory for my first love that has already disappeared?" "First love?" Zhou Yu paused for a moment, then said coldly, "My first unforgettable first love when I was a young girl was a farce of a prince choosing a concubine. Do you think there is anything clean and beautiful about that?" Su Lu was silent, and he launched a silent and awkward attack on the food on the table. Brother Prince doesn't seem to be the same Brother Prince from back then. Zhou Yu's eyes became a bit misty and empty. Although she no longer had that kind of intimate relationship with Macho in the back mountain, after all, she had drank afternoon tea with that madam for many years. She had been influenced and cultivated a sharp political analysis. She had also established some of her own information channels and knew that some of the things that had happened to the 1,000-year-old family recently. Life is arranged to walk on the golden path until he climbs to the top of the secular world. He was mentally prepared for all of this, and he used his life to actively welcome it, but he actually had a falling out with the lady. Zhou Yu smiled slightly, but it was unknown what kind of emotion was mixed in her smile. "You probably don't know, but this year he has been in the West Woods for the Zhong family. In the face of the Federation government and the hunger of those families, he actually tied the Tai family to that little girl's chariot. It was a really risky and crazy choice. The lady tolerated him for a year, but in the end, she couldn't continue to tolerate him. Speaking of which, this really doesn't seem like his style." She frowned and looked in confusion at Su Lu across the table. "I keep thinking that this matter has something to do with you. We all know that you have a very good relationship with the little princess of the Zhong family. Regarding this matter, I thank Tai Ziyuan for a lifetime," Su Lu said in an extremely serious tone. He had already learned about the things that happened in the West Woods in the past year through the old man. In addition to being angry and silent, he was very clear about the significance of Tai Ziyuan's decision. Now the Zhong family is facing the most dangerous situation. They are facing difficulties both internally and externally. The most important thing is that the military power is being taken back piece by piece by the Federation. The old house and Zhong Ziqi's side are in a dispute, and they can only watch as these things happen. Zhou Yu looked at Su Lu worriedly and said, "Your return has alarmed the Federal Central Computer." The 4 words first sequence can deter countless people who want to harm you, but you have to remember that you are not the invincible creator. You are just a normal person who is better at fighting and has some background. "Why are you telling me this?" Su Lu asked in a low voice. After the tiger died, the Zhong family became a big piece of fat meat. Everyone wants to take a bite. In fact, the government and those families are doing this. No matter who wants to stand up for the Zhong family, it is equivalent to going against the government, the 7 families, and countless people in power in the Federation at the same time. Without a doubt, this is a stupid action that is similar to courting death. Therefore, even fierce people like Brother Crown Prince and Mr. Tian can only endure and do some work according to the channels set by the Federation. But you are different. Zhou Yu was silent for a moment and then continued in a low voice, "You will not endure and will not wait, so I have to remind you of the difficulty of this matter. Being able to return to the Federation alive should have been a very happy thing." After thinking for a while, Su Lu said in a low voice, "But it is very strange. After coming back and hearing about these things, none of them made me happy. Other than the matter in the West Woods, as I said just now, there is another important matter that I will tell you later. It makes me feel cold and disgusted." I suddenly feel that the days in that small courtyard in the slums of the Empire's Tianjing planet for half a year were actually so peaceful and happy. He put his right hand into the cool stream and let the bamboo leaves brush against the edge of his palm. He said, "Commander Zhong has guarded the Westwoods alone for more than 10 years for the Federation. After the death of his wife, the Federation did not reward him for his service. Instead, they used unscrupulous means to seize benefits. They did not even let go of a little orphan girl. This matter is very difficult for me to accept. If it was difficult to accept, then he would not accept it." This was his attitude. Chapter 669. Last night, I directly questioned Mr. President, but unfortunately, I didn't get any clear answer. Of course, Mr. President's mood obviously became a little worse because of my doubts. Su Lu raised his head and wiped the water on his hands on his lapel. He laughed at himself and said, "I know that Mr. President has his reasons, but the problem is that even he can't do anything, so what can I do?" Su Lu narrowed his eyes and smiled at Zhou. His eyes were as bright as before, but there was not much of a smile. He said in a low but firm voice, "But I still have to do something." Without waiting for Zhou to speak, he raised his right arm to stop her and continued, "Don't worry, I'm not an impulsive person. Being impulsive won't solve any problems. I've thought about it before. The Zhong family's administrative power and economic control over the Westwoods has been weakened by the Federation. In fact, it's a good thing for the Federation. And to be honest, this power is something that the Zhong family should have. But when Commander Zhong died, he gave little watermelon to me. So, as long as I'm still alive, no one can hurt her, and no one can take away what belongs to her. Next week, I'll go to the Supreme Court to watch the trial. I want to see a Yuan win this case. If he loses, I'll fight again." It sounded like a declaration of bravery and ruthlessness, especially when faced with the pressure of the entire Federation from top to bottom. Be it a general or a hooligan on the street, when uttered such a declaration, they would most likely feel somewhat flustered and embarrassed. But strangely enough, when the declaration came out of Su Li's mouth, there was no such feeling. There was only a piercingly cold and ruthless feeling, because for him, he was merely calmly stating a fact that could happen. In the early years, the biting cold aura hidden under the cold appearance had long become the main color of Zhou besides red. Although she was definitely not an idealist, on the contrary, she maintained the cold and sharp realism taught by the madam in many things. But after hearing Su Li's words, there was no ridicule, no anger, only calmness, because the Su Li she knew, since a few years ago in that apartment, had been constantly expressing an uncompromising attitude to the world. And strangely, he was still alive, and his life was getting more and more exciting. Zhou did not ask Su Lu what kind of method he would use to win the case again if he lost the case in the Supreme Court. It would probably be the hard methods of guns, fists, and courage. She raised her glass of red wine, toasted the man across the table, and said with a smile, "The trial will start next Friday. The biggest variable now is that it is said that Chief Justice He Ying may not personally hear the case because of health reasons. If Chief Justice He Ying does not personally hear the case, who dares to go against the collective will of the Federation government and the Parliament?" Su Lu said with a frown, "Is there someone who is tampering with the case? The Chief Justice is already 91 years old this year. Because of health reasons, he has not personally heard a case for many years. The last time was the case between the UNICEF and the Federation TV station regarding Jian Shu'er." Zhou shook her head and explained, "The old man's health is indeed not very good. With his position in the Federation, even that person in Philadelphia does not dare to suppress him. Who dares to tamper with him? I hope the Chief Justice will live a long life." The two people at the table raised their glasses of red wine at the same time and blessed the Chief Justice who dared to make the god of war Li Pifis sad. At this moment, with a soft beep, a military encrypted email appeared in Su Li's phone. Su Li looked down at his phone, stood up, and helped Zhou get her windbreaker. He said, "Find a safe place. There is something I need you to help me decide. You're in such a hurry to leave?" Zhou Yu looked at the remaining 5 bottles of red wine on the table. I'm leaving early tomorrow morning. I only have one night. Su Lu walked to the table, held her elbow out of habit, and helped her up. He explained, it's a bit urgent. That hooligan will come back tomorrow, and Prince Brother and the little princess of the Zhong family have also arrived in the special district of the capital region. You came back alive, don't you want to meet them? And what about your women? Zhou Yu asked in confusion, what is so important and urgent? It's an email from Jian Shuer. Su Lu put his phone in his pocket and explained, she arranged for me to go to Philadelphia. You're going to see the god of war? Zhou Yu's eyes widened, and her charming face suddenly became a lot more charming. Yes, I have some very important stories that I want to ask that old man to confirm. Su Lu patted his chest and said with a smile, you know what? A guy like me is about to come into contact with the real history. Zhou Yu did not know what kind of historical truth he was going to see the god of war in Philadelphia. She did not want to ask because she did not want to embarrass him. After a moment of silence, she could not help but say hesitantly, it's rare to see you smile like this. It seems, it's a big deal. Sitting in the black car without any logo, along the familiar number 2 highway, leaving the capital special district, the winter wind blew in through the window, making the little red flower on Zhou Yu's temple tremble slightly, and her flower-like face rippled with the wind. When they passed by an intersection, Su Lu, who was holding the steering wheel, subconsciously turned back and looked at the woman beside him who was shining brightly. His narrowed eyes naturally showed a look of admiration. The beautiful but disgusting daughter of a high-ranking official in Linhai State had long disappeared. Now, beside him was an unmarried mother full of wisdom, tranquility, and beauty, full of a firm life philosophy. At this moment, Zhou Yu also turned around at the same time. The two looked at each other and smiled with a trace of nostalgia. Back then, it was at this intersection that Zhou Yu, who knew that she was pregnant and was on the verge of collapse, saw a black car. She thought that the person in the car was Nightmare Source. After stopping the black car, she cried to her heart's content. She cried to her heart's content, and the ink dripped down her delicate cheeks. She also cried about the strange and warm years she and Su Lu spent together. I drank too much, but I'm not full yet. Zhou Yu gently pressed her slender fingers on her red lips, swallowed a burp, and looked at him with her eyes wide open. So, when the car reached the youth of Wangdu, Su Lu bought some fresh vegetables from the nearby market, and Zhou Yu picked some pomegranates that she ate at home in a small shop on the side of the road, and then went home. There was an apartment in Wangdu, and that was home. In their hearts, it was the safest and quietest place. With the fastest speed, he checked for any eavesdropping devices, and then pulled up the relevant surveillance data. After confirming that no one had broken into this room in the past year, Su Lu finally relaxed and looked at his real home in the capital ring. Zhou Yu was already lying lazily on the sofa, her 2 bare feet high. The apartment, which had been empty for more than a year, was still relatively clean because the dust removal equipment was always on. The sofa and the light screen were still on both sides of the living room, and the TV program was still set in Zhou Yu's favorite mode. The instant lunchbox in the fridge was naturally inedible, but fortunately, Magnolia was a good personal secretary. She had paid the electricity and water bills for more than 100 years, so there was no need to worry about power outages. The best thing was that the 2 people in the apartment were still the same 2 people from back then. Just like back then, Su Lu and Zhou Yu began to assign tasks. Su Lu was responsible for cooking and cleaning, and Zhou Yu was responsible for eating and enjoying all the fruits of labor. After such a long time, the pregnant woman was still firmly in play in this apartment. There were bean sprouts in soup, yellow fried small-tail fish, and spicy stir-fried big shell inkstone. There was absolutely no synthetic protein meat on the table that they hated so much. There were only 4 big bowls of fragrant special-grade rice, 1 for her and 3 for him. Su Lu picked up some bean sprouts and mixed it with the rice. He lowered his head and quickly ate half a bowl of rice. Suddenly, he raised his head and said directly, there is a mastermind behind the attack on Ancient Bell. The seed of the empire called Hiyuyu couldn't get the relevant information. Someone in the government or the military sold the information. I need to find out who it is. Zhou Yu slowly put down the chopsticks in her hand and gently stuck the rice grains on the corner of her mouth with her right thumb. She used these small actions to dissolve the shock in her heart. From Su Li's tone, she knew that this matter was not a joke, nor was it a boring inference of a conspiracy theorist. Brother Jiao. After Secretary Jiao committed suicide, the only clue of the case was Cui Zhedong. She slightly frowned, looked at the dishes on the table, and said softly, "Father has always been a little sad about Secretary Jiao's death. I can only be sure that he was not involved in this matter, but I don't know if the Ministry of National Defense issued that electronic order, and I don't know if what Secretary Jiao said in his suicide note was true." Brother Jiao was only pushed to the front. There are many people behind him. Su Lu picked up the cup and drank a mouthful of water, and said in a low voice, "If Cui Zhedong is really a problem, then this matter is too scary." Zhou Yu said with a worried expression, "Your analysis just now can be directly refuted. This is definitely not something that the government or the military can do. It must be the cooperation of the government, the military, and the Bureau of Proclamation." She stared into Su Li's eyes and asked, "If this is the case, are you still going to continue investigating?" Before Su Li could answer, Zhou Yu pushed the bowl in front of her away and said angrily, "Forget it. Pretend I didn't ask. I know what an idiot like you'll answer." Su Lu chuckled and knew that she was angry because she was worried about him. He continued, "Don't worry about me. There are people in the government and the military who are trying to cover up all of this. My problem now is that I have no way of finding out who those people are." Zhou Yu looked at him and frowned. "I know a lot about the military faction. Do you want me to help you find a general range of targets? Whoever benefits the most from Commander Zhong's death is the most suspicious. But there is a very cruel fact that you have to know." Zhou Yu looked at him with a trace of pity. "I just said that the entire Federation will benefit from Tiger Zhong's death. Even President Pabre is no exception." Chapter 670. More than a year ago, Commander Zhong had dinner at the official residence the night before he returned to the Westwoods after the victory celebration. That night, Mr. President and Commander Zhong did not reach a complete consensus. It could even be said that there was some fierce conflict between them. At the same time, as you said, Commander Zhong's death is very good for Mr. President's strategy of integrating the Federation. Su Lu whispered, "But I believe in Mr. President. For so many years, he has used his practical actions to prove that he is not a common politician, but a politician who really insists on something in his heart. I have never doubted this." Zhou Yu's slender fingers casually played with the chopsticks and said, "Mr. President did not hesitate to have a conflict with Macho in the back of the mountain in order to pardon you. And a politician who can be recognized by both you and the rogue at the same time must be trustworthy. What I said just now is actually to tell you that if you want to reverse the prophet and find the Black Hand hidden in the Federation, it will be very difficult. I have a list." After a moment of silence, Su Li picked out a chip from his collar without warning and slowly placed it on the table in front of Zhou Yu. He stared at the chip and frowned very tightly. "Reverse the prophet. Compared with this list, I need your professional analytical vision to roughly catch the tail of some people." Zhou Yu frowned and looked at the glittering chip in front of her. She suddenly said, "The workbench is still in the same place?" "Yes," Su Li replied. Zhou Yu held the edge of the table with both hands and squeezed the chair out of the way. She dragged the pair of pink slippers into the bedroom and a moment later took out the black box. Under the triple encryption environment, she turned on the device and put the chip into the reading rod. Looking at the scrolling information fragments on the light screen, Zhou Yu's expression became more serious than ever. She suddenly looked up at Su Li's eyes and asked in a trembling voice, "Where did you get this information?" As Minister Zhou's chief secretary, Brother Jiao needs to meet too many people. It's hard to sort out useful information. Su Li didn't answer the question about the source of the information. Instead, he said in a low voice, "What you've seen is all the information about Cui Zhedong since the 60th year of the constitutional era. All the suspicious interactions are in there." He walked to Zhou Yu's side. His finger brushed past her shoulder and pointed at one of the reports. As the assistant director of the Bureau of Proclamation, Cui Zedong obviously met with the military generals more often. Also, pay attention to these three dates: April 30th, year 61 of the constitutional calendar, September 25th, year 64 of the constitutional calendar, and December 13th, year 69 of the constitutional calendar. What's wrong with these three dates? This is the date that someone else picked out for me. Su Lu shrugged. He could not explain to Zhou Yu that the Federal Central Computer was now his computing tool. But there's something wrong with the first date, because Cui Zedong's citizenship signal went blank for a short time. How could it be blank? Zhou Yu's pupils shrank as she asked in confusion. The Federation's electronic surveillance network is like the light of a star that is everywhere all of a sudden. But there are ways to block this light. Su Lu gestured as he explained. For example, a lead box, an extremely enclosed space without any channels for information to be released. In fact, according to my analysis, it's possible to find blank areas in the core areas of some wildlife sanctuaries. Cui Zedong is one of the people in the universe who understands the glory of the Charter the most. It's not inconceivable that he could think of a way to temporarily avoid it for a period of time. The question is why he avoided it. He frowned and asked, if the force that Cui Zedong represents has been building a conspiracy since many years ago, what I don't understand is that on the last two dates, he entered a certain conference room, but he didn't block the signal. Zhou Yu was silent for a moment before she said, it's very simple. Those people realized that there was no need to block the signal. On the contrary, doing so would easily cause problems. According to the first Charter and citizen privacy regulations, even the Federal Central Computer might not have a file of what those people talked about. I understand what you mean. Su Lu rubbed his forehead and said, and the Central Computer really doesn't have a file. Although I'm more curious about your real relationship with the Bureau of Proclamation, why the Central Computer gave you such high authority, and why you know so much secret information. Zhou Yu raised her head and looked at him quietly. She said, I know you're more interested in the inside story of these three gatherings. You already have the list. What else do you need me to do? I can't believe this list. Su Lu stared into her eyes and said seriously, according to the Central Computer's backtracking data, there were very few people who participated in the gathering in the 61st year of the constitutional calendar. 2 of them even died. However, there were many people who participated in the last 2 gatherings. The current Vice President of the Federation, Byron, former Deputy Minister of National Defense, Yang Jingsong, Deputy Commander of the 2nd Military Region. Zhou Yu looked at the names on the computer screen. Her expression was as cold and calm as ever, but her voice became hoarse because of the lingering nervousness. I even saw Du Shaoqing's name. The name of the gathering was the 1st Military Academy's Alumni Association. Su Lu said in a low voice, perhaps it really is just an alumni association. The situation is not as severe as we think. In fact, although I've never liked Du Shaoqing, I really find it hard to accept that he's a conspirator. I'll go check and see if there's any internal connection between these people other than the fact that they all graduated from the 1st Military Academy, Zhou Yu said after a moment of silence. Just check the files. Don't investigate. Su Lu stared into her eyes and said, I know that Shi Qinghai is definitely still investigating those matters from back then, so you must not give this list to him. It's too dangerous. I have to handle it myself. You're not omnipotent. Zhou Yu said unhappily, if your enemies are these important figures, don't even think about continuing to play the role of a lone ranger. To a certain extent, I can be omnipotent. I don't need to explain this point. Omnipotent? Many people have speculated about the scope of influence of the military radicals, including Madam. However, if this list of names of yours can really explain some things, then I have to say that the power of the military radicals is more terrifying than anyone can imagine. The combination of the Vice President of the Federation and a powerful military leader, do you really understand what kind of destructive power they have? After all, Byron is the Vice President, not the President. Su Lu stared at the rice bowl in front of him with a firm gaze, as if he wanted to burn all the remaining rice grains in the bowl into ashes. As for the federal forces, they can never be the second military region or Du Shaoqing's troops. They can't cause too much trouble. He was just a colonel of the Federation who enjoyed the treatment of a division and did not have any established military forces at his disposal. However, after the old man helped him sort out the list of names of those important figures and powerful generals of the federal military, he was not afraid at all. Apart from his nature, his greatest and most indestructible confidence came from Philadelphia, which was the highest and steepest mountain in the universe. There was a god in the federal military. The subordinates he brought out from the battlefield were now all important generals of the military. Even the fat young chef was now the commander of the new 17th Division. Even though he was old and had been sitting by the Lake of Philadelphia for more than 10 years, as long as he was alive, there could only be one voice in the entire federal military. It was the voice of Li Pifu. "So you're going to Philadelphia?" Zhou Yu asked softly after a moment of silence. "Have you ever thought of the most terrible question?" Zhou Yu looked at him quietly, narrowed her eyes, and said softly, "The army god is 88 years old. No matter how great a person is, he can't beat time. He will die. Those people, maybe, have been waiting for that day." Hearing this, Su Lu realized that he had forgotten the most important thing, that was the age of the old man in Philadelphia. Like a cold stone being stuffed into his heart, he felt a chill. Under the sudden pressure, he inexplicably thought of many other small things. The army god was so old, but what about Uncle? Why did he look so young when he was in Donglin? Many people are wary of the radicals in the military. But in many people's eyes, this force has never really taken shape. They just rely on some similar ideas and desire to fight to secretly cooperate with each other. Zhou Yu looked at his face and continued, "If they have formed some kind of tight organization, things will become very troublesome. Now the Federation is facing a very important problem. General Miles has decided to announce his retirement after the front-line troops take down the X-3 system. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the commander of the 1st Military Region. This position is too important. Whoever takes over this position may decide the attitude of the federal military in the future generations." "What is the attitude of Madam and Minister Zhou?" Su Lu asked. "The main thing now is to see the attitude of Mr. President. According to the information I received, Mr. President and a few of the major families have reached an unprecedented agreement. Probably because they are wary of the undercurrent. After General Miles retires, they will probably nominate General Li Jiedu to take over the position. Li Jiedu was not a very famous name in the Federation. He was the only son of the army god Li Pifu and the father of the invincible Li Feng. Probably because he was sandwiched between two bright stars, he did not leave a deep impression on people even though he was now the dean of the 1st Military Academy." Su Lu scratched his head and thought of the middle-aged man full of scholarly demeanor. He nodded and said, "This is the best choice." As the only son of the army god Li Pifu, Li Jiedu was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He could receive the full support of many military leaders. His style of doing things was gentle, even conservative. In the federal military, which was increasingly filled with hostility, he was an extremely powerful counterbalance. This was indeed the best choice. Chapter 671. Feiqing City had great scenery. The northern hemisphere of S1 had entered winter, and the area around Linhai State University town was already covered with wind and snow. However, this city, which was more than 1,000 kilometers away from the capital, was still decorated with elegant autumn colors. There was a sense of desolation, but more importantly, there was a sense of emptiness. It was hard for people to sigh about the desolation after the autumn season. There was a lake that gently rippled, releasing steam to absorb the dryness. There were mountains that rose up to block the cold wind from the north and the rainstorm from the other side of the sea. Therefore, this city was warm in winter and cool in summer. It was pleasant in spring and autumn. There was nothing to criticize about this city, just like the old man in the manor by the lake. The roads that were wet by the autumn rain were ancient. Between the wooden 4-story buildings, countless flowers and trees were hidden in the corners of the alleys or in full bloom on the streets. On both sides of the road that was connected by another green mountain, there were countless famous body cultivation centers in Feiqing City. The wooden and copper-nailed doors of these body cultivation centers were about 3 meters high and were all open during the day. Tourists walking on the streets could clearly hear the shouting and the sound of punches and kicks coming from inside. They curiously stopped to watch and comment. It was unknown whether those boys with black eyes would choose to come here to cultivate in the future. Su Lu, who was wearing civilian clothes, was also one of the tourists today. He paid more attention to these body cultivation centers than the tourists. Many years ago, when he was escaping from Donglin, Mr. Tian had once mentioned the body cultivation centers in Feiqing City to him. Later, he learned that the powerful Mr. Tian was from Feiqing City and had once arrogantly defeated more than a dozen body cultivation centers. No one could stop him. In addition, the powerful figures he met in the capital ring, such as Kong Wu from the Lin family and Brother Zeng behind Li Laoqi, were all from Feiqing City. This city with excellent scenery and these body cultivation centers that were like tourist attractions had cultivated many powerful figures for the Federation. This was the most vigorous city in the Federation. Of course, the most vigorous deed in the history of this city was that it had contributed a pair of brothers with the surname Li to the Federation. One of them had thousands of incarnations and faintly influenced the society in all kinds of absurd and wonderful ways. The other one had turned into a god with a charter on his back. He looked down at the universe indifferently and protected the Federation for many years, standing by the fountain square. Su Lu subconsciously turned his head and looked at the huge manor by the lake at the foot of the mountain. The Federation's god of war, Li Pifu, lived in that manor. Ever since this old man retired, he had been living by the lake and refused to see anyone. Except for his close friends like Lady Tai, even the former president didn't get to see him in person even when he came to Feiqing twice. The old man didn't rely on his past peerless achievements to nurture his arrogance. Instead, he wanted to use these details to tell everyone in the Federation that since he had retired, he had truly retired. In fact, how could this be possible? The peach tree and the plum tree didn't need to speak, so there would naturally be a small path under their feet. The group of 5 statues on the Charter Square also didn't need to speak, but people would always subconsciously look up. Li Pifu no longer expressed any opinions on the affairs of the Federation. However, before the Federation government made a major decision, they would always call Feiqing City to ask for his opinion. But at least Li Bofu was able to fully express his attitude. The old man had trapped himself in Lake Feiqing for more than 10 years in a similar way to self-imprisonment. During such a long time, he was forced to leave for the capital because of 2 things. The first time was after the attack on the ancient bell. The Federation wanted to launch an all-out attack on the Empire. Li Pifu was invited to go there. He only showed his old and thin face in front of the camera for a moment, which attracted countless people's enthusiastic cheers. The second time was earlier. For the little guy who was imprisoned in the military prison of Qingqing City, the old man went to the capital and had a meal with Lady Tai in the Linyuan. Then he went to visit the prison. After that, the Federation had one more young war hero who couldn't be defeated. Su Lu was about to meet the Federation's god of war, but he was still wandering in the streets. This had nothing to do with his carelessness. He didn't have the leisure to explore the ancient times like an artist. It was just that Jian Shui had arranged for him to meet the Federation's god of war at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He arrived too early. He didn't have the qualifications to knock on the door of an old man who had not seen guests for many years and dared to make the president sigh. Fortunately, time passed by quickly. Looking down at the hands on his military watch, Su Lu took a deep breath. He ignored the vigilant stares from all around the quiet front gate of the manor. He also didn't ask the old man to help him calculate how many special task force agents or the most elite military security forces were scattered around the manor. He directly stepped up the stone steps, raised his right arm, and knocked on the door in the green courtyard. There were a few fields with sexy ears of rice on the left side and a few ponds full of golden carp swimming freely on the right side. There was a crooked path made of white stone in the middle. The end of the path led directly to the lake, where there were a few piles of stones scattered around the lake. Usually, The old man was used to sitting on a pile of stones to fish, but today he wasn't fishing. Instead, he was sitting on the glossy sandalwood floor in the room after his routine afternoon nap, waiting for a young guest. There are still many things to do in the Federation, the Army, and the front line. With your character, you are in such a hurry to see an old man like me. It seems that you have seen, known, or guessed something in the past year in the Empire. The old man sitting cross-legged on the floor didn't turn around. His thin old body was casually draped in an old-fashioned pajamas, which made him look not very tall, even a little short. Sulu stood at the door and looked at the back of the old man, but still felt like an unattainable snow peak. Subconsciously, his mouth was a little dry. Now, he was able to face Mr. President with ease. When he saw the ruler of the left Sky Star region in the Empire, he was even more fearless. As one's status and power changed, one's mentality would gradually become stronger. But for some reason, after so many years, when he saw the God of War again, he was still very nervous. He was as nervous as a primary school student when he saw his strict class teacher. He took off his fake leather boots and arranged them neatly. Wearing his socks, he walked to the floor and softly walked behind the old man. He bowed and said in a low voice, "I do have a lot of questions. Some of them are about what happened in the past, and some of them need your guidance." He knew a lot of secrets in the past in the Empire, which involved the uncle and the history. He had always believed that if one couldn't see the history clearly, it would be difficult to grasp the present and the future. Besides, the Federation was facing a very serious situation right now. He needed the wisdom and incomparable influence of this old man to help him see through the complicated situation. Therefore, he said this very sincerely. Hearing his words, Li Pifu didn't turn around. His thin shoulders trembled slightly, and he said in an old voice, "Before that, I also have some questions to ask you." Sit. Sulu quickly moved his legs and sat next to the old man. His back was straight, his eyes were squinting, and his appearance was very standard. "We're at home, not in the army. You don't need to be like this." Li Pifu said with a smile, "There's tea on the table. Pour it yourself." Sulu glanced at him from the corner of his eyes and found that the military god didn't seem to mind him sitting so close to the old man. He relaxed a bit and carefully picked up the teapot from the red stone. He respectfully poured a cup for the old man first, and then poured a cup for himself. "The first question I want to ask is..." Li Pifu seemed to have thought of something. He paused for a moment, and a faint self-deprecating look flashed across his white eyebrows. "Is that guy still alive? Speaking of which, he's a dying man, but there are still some things that he can't see past." The old man had the right to laugh at himself, but Sulu didn't have the courage to laugh at him together. Although he was mentally prepared, he still didn't expect the old man to throw this question at him directly. Therefore, an indescribable nervousness suddenly occupied his body and mind, and the hand holding the teapot stiffened. After a long silence, Li Bofu didn't use any words, eyes, or aura to oppress him. He just waited quietly. His wrinkled hands were still holding the small teacup to his lips, and he sipped it one mouthful at a time. "Teacher should still be alive." Sulu stared at the barley tea in the cup and answered with a slightly hoarse voice, "But he didn't appear in front of me, and I don't think he'll return to the Federation. Scourges live for 1,000 years. Li Pifu slowly put down the teacup and said with an expressionless face, "For many years, many times, I thought he was really dead, but in the end he survived. Don't waste your energy to guess why I can guess that he's still alive." Li Pifu glanced at him and said indifferently, "Last time when I saw you in prison, I said that if you could take out the chip, you could go to the Empire and pretend to be a member of the imperial family. Now that the war has begun, the Empire's devices must have all been turned on. You were able to come back alive, so you must have taken out the chip. If you don't have this ability, then he's still alive. I've seen the report you provided to the Bureau of Proclamation and the Ministry of Defense. It's a miracle, but I think there are no miracles in the Empire." Cold sweat gradually soaked Su Li's back. This thin and old man looked tired, but in fact his eyes were extremely sharp. If he didn't admit that his uncle was still alive, then he wouldn't have been able to convince the old man to give him a way to escape the Empire's pursuit. Moreover, it would be equivalent to lying to his face. Although he seemed to have gotten through this, the old man's indifferent eyes still gave him endless pressure. He always felt that the old man seemed to know more but deliberately didn't mention it. This time you've made a great contribution to the Federation, so I don't think there's a need to discuss some small details. Li Pifu tapped the table with his dry index finger, indicating that he should continue pouring tea. Then he asked, "The second question is, why didn't that Princess Su Meng kill you?" Princess Su Meng? Su Lu was startled for a moment before he realized that the old man was referring to Huai Chaoshi. One question after another was completely out of his expectation. Some kind of invisible pressure began to spread in the room by Lake Feiqing, and his straight eyebrows began to curve. Facing this kind of pressure, he stubbornly raised his head and looked straight at the Federation's god of war, saying, "Because she can't kill me. And I've met this great teacher. I heard that the former great teacher Fan is your teacher?" Chapter 672. The clear light outside the window mixed with the fragrance of rice and water gently scattered into the room, making the dark sandalwood floor seem to be shrouded in a layer of moisture. The slightly yellow water in the small porcelain cup on the tea table rippled with extremely thin ripples. Su Lu mustered up his courage and stiffened his neck to say these few words, making the air even more humid, actually making people feel a little difficult to breathe. "She didn't kill you, because she can't kill you." This is a very good answer. The expression on the old face of the god of war Li Pifu did not change at all. He repeated Su Li's answer, a trace of a smile appeared on his face, and continued to say, "But you, this little guy, are still only suitable to do things with your fists and feet. Your ability to speak is not very strong. You want to counterattack so soon? Are you worried that this old man will ask you some secrets that you can't answer?" Su Li's fists were tightly clenched at his waist, and his lips were dry from nervousness. The ordinary skinny old man beside him, with just a casual word, "No," even if he didn't say anything, he would be able to crush him to the ground with his protruding index finger, and never be able to rise again. This old man is the real invincible god of war, once on the battlefield to assassinate the emperor of the empire, once with a slap of the hand he slapped the uncle into a shadow for half of his life. In the face of such a terrifying big figure, even if he has made progress in the empire in the past year, and his confidence has skyrocketed, but he still can't have the slightest thought of challenging or underestimating him. But there are a lot of words that he must say, just like the old man's smile and ridicule. Both of them have secrets, but they don't know how deep the fear of each other's secrets are. So he continued to speak. "The things that Uncle taught me when I was young, and the things that you and Madman Li know, if I'm not wrong, should be the secret of the Empire's royal family, Yada Jinqi. I don't understand, even if you and Uncle's teacher is the great teacher from the Empire's mysterious family, but why is the Yada Jinqi that only the Empire's royal family can learn, appearing in the Li family's body? First, the ability that this old body of mine possesses does indeed originate from the Empire's royal family's Yada Jinqi, although I have always thought that this little thing called Jinqi is more appropriate to use the word overbearing to describe it." Li Pifu's flowery eyebrows slightly raised, the gaze in his old eyes contained a kind of extreme tranquility, some kind of reminiscence, but the cup seemed to have been long ago. The old man slowly stretched out a finger and pointed at the teacup on the table. The yellow tea in the small porcelain cup suddenly calmed down, just like his eyes at this moment. "Second, many years ago, I had the same question as you, many years ago. After 3 years of secret research with the Federal Academy of Science, we came to a general conclusion: the so-called Jinqi is probably a kind of waveband emission similar to biological radiation. The monitoring equipment of the Academy of Science can capture this kind of radiation, but there is no way to analyze what it is exactly." Li Pifu slowly stretched out a second finger, calmly recounting the old news from many years ago. 80 years ago, I believe that both your teacher and I had many doubts about this question. In the end, it could only be attributed to the difference in physical constitution, or to be more mysterious, it was probably a random choice made by the Creator. An extremely small number of people have a certain kind of ability, can learn and master this kind of method. The Lees of Philadelphia have no blood relationship with the imperial family. If you insist on doubting this point, you might as well think about your own background. The old man looked at Sulu with a smile and said, "The Creator chose the Huai family of the left sky star region. That is why they can ascend to the throne, not because they are the imperial family of the empire. That is why they naturally have this kind of ability. As a citizen of the Federation, I firmly ridicule any kind of natural talent of the monarchy. In the end, whether or not you can learn the Yada Jinchi is only related to luck." Sulu silently listened to the military god's explanation, carefully not missing a single word, but his eyes were fixed on the teacup on the table, because he discovered a very strange and magical scene. Previously, when Li Pifu stretched out a finger, the tea in the porcelain cup suddenly became tranquil and smooth like a mirror, but when the old man stretched out a second finger shakily, the tea in the porcelain cup suddenly began to boil and bubble like a boiling spring. In the small teacup, there was actually a hint of a storm. Su Li's pupils constricted, and he asked in a hoarse voice, "The release of Zhen Qi?" Huai Chaosher said that it was useless. "It seems that you have also reached this step." The old man chuckled. The two fingers in the air were as motionless as mountains, but his old voice was full of emotions. "It seems that the little girl of the Huai family, who is known as a genius, is still a little lacking in understanding these little things." Su Lu held the edge of the tea table with both hands, staring at the storm in the small teacup, waiting for the military god's next words. The little thing called Jinchi can be divided into two stages. One is inside the body, and the other is outside. It is easy to understand inside the body, but what is outside? It is resonance. It is to resonate with the existence of the same cause in nature, and thereby control it. If the string wave is called dog shit, then when the dog shit in our body is released and comes into contact with the dog shit in the natural environment, the two will meet happily and become one, and you will be able to control countless dog shit around you. Being able to control enough dog shit is a very terrifying thing in battle. You just said that Huai Chaosher did not care about it, but that is because there is too little dog shit in the natural environment. I have always had an idea. Li Pifu smiled as he looked at the teacup under his fingers, and said, "The person who invented this method countless years ago must have lived in a world with infinite dog shit. At that time, the fighters could set off a dog shit storm with a casual flick of their sleeves or a finger, killing countless people. It was really a happy dog shit world." Su Lu felt very embarrassed, because it was hard for him to imagine that the military god, who had a supreme position in the Federation and was revered by all people, would be like a rude street vendor who kept saying the word dog shit. Although this metaphor was easy to understand, and it made it easy for him to understand the deeper meaning of Yada Jinchi, it still felt strange. Regarding the release of Jinchi, I have to admit that your teacher, my brother, is indeed a genius that no one can reach. In the entire universe, including the royal family of Huai in the left sky galaxy, he is probably the only one who can find a way to connect the Zhen Qi in the body with the information transmission in the mecha. Although I have always thought that this kind of marionette-style mecha control method is only suitable for the stage and does not have any real help in combat, but, in the end, he has done something that no one else can do or even think about. A scene from many years ago appeared in Su Li's mind very naturally. In the dusky twilight of Donglin, on the green hills, an uncle was twisting his perky buttocks. His fingers were as fast as lightning as they caressed the huge M52 mech. The mech trembled under his fingers, completely under his control. This is indeed a miraculous thing. He sighed sincerely. In the last period before I escaped from the Empire, I was surrounded by several Wolf Fang mecha of the Empire. I also wanted to try this method, but I found that I could not even get a clue. In the future, when you don't need to fight, you can try more. Li Pifu looked at him gently. You have already proven that you have a talent for mecha repair that is not inferior to his. Now, your Zhen Qi cultivation is on the right path. With the combination of the two, you are probably the only young person who can hope to copy his method. Your evaluation is too high. Su Lu replied shamefully. No, it is us old guys who have raised the flag too high. The old man coughed softly and said hoarsely, Without us as a comparison, in any period of the Federation's history, young people like you and Li Feng would definitely be more dazzling than you are now. His old hand gently stroked his heaving chest. Under his brown-dotted skin were some blue veins that had lost some elasticity. After a moment of rest, Li Pifu slowly extended his third finger, the tip of his thumb. Now, answer the third question. Yes, our teacher is the former great teacher of the Empire. In other words, the Lees of Philadelphia's generation in the Federation for the past few decades were all taught by our teacher. After saying this, Li Pifu casually turned his 3 fingers in the air and then withdrew them. He tidied up the old pajamas on his body, stood up, and walked out of the room. Looking at the old man's weary back, Su Lu bounced his knees and stood up. For some reason, he was absent-minded. Although he had already confirmed this before, hearing the Federation's military god admit that his teacher was from the Empire still shocked him again. If the people of the Federation knew this secret, what kind of expression would they have? How many glasses would fall to the ground? How many people would be disappointed, angry, frustrated, or even inexplicably sad? Your teacher is a genius, but your teacher's teacher is actually even more of a genius. Li Pifu slowly walked to the door, bent over to put on his shoes, and said calmly, "He has a very feminine name, Huajiu." Su Lu quickly stepped forward and held the old man's withered arm. Although he is our teacher, he is not much older than us. The old man continued to recall in a low voice, "That year, we were preparing for the constitutional calendar ceremony. The whole Philadelphia was very lively. Us 2 brothers thought it was too noisy, so we secretly sneaked into the core wildlife reserve deep in the mountains. When your teacher was 6 years old, we had already found out that there was a problem with the surveillance there, so we always treated that place as the most secretive playground. When we first saw Hua Jieyu, we didn't know that he was from the Empire, and we didn't expect that he would become our teacher. At that time, he was covered in dust, carrying a big backpack that seemed to contain infinite treasures, like a traveler who mistakenly arrived in Philadelphia on a spaceship. His black eyes were full of curiosity for new things, and they turned very fast. Yes, his black eyes turned very fast, just like the moving light curtain on the spaceship. Li Pifu narrowed his eyes as he recalled the scene that had been covered in dust for a long time. He was unusually calm. Su Lu helped the old man walk slowly in the corridor, feeling a little complicated. In the secluded room behind the old man and the young man, the small porcelain cup on the table was spinning rapidly. Although the 3 fingers that seemed to have magical power had already calmly retracted, there seemed to be some kind of magical power that was still rippling in the air, urging the porcelain cup to spin faster and faster. Finally, the teacup silently broke into pieces, but the light yellow tea inside did not spill out at all. Instead, it melted into a ball of water and spun very fast, just like the curious eyes of the traveler. Chapter 673. The same story, when told by different people, would naturally have a completely different plot structure and melodramatic creation. The most secretive and, in fact, most influential story at the end of the 36 constitutional calendars was no exception in this regard. The great teacher from the Empire arrived at the Federation at the same time as the research spaceship of the Federation, or even earlier. From then on, countless magnificent, melodramatic, messy, tear-streaked, and crazy scenes were created. The genius master named Hua Jiyu was one of the genius students, Fengyu. Of course, he was probably not named Fengyu. He never mentioned these things to the ignorant apprentices beside the mine, but Su Lu once heard Huai Chaosher mention some memory fragments. The white-clothed, bare-legged artistic figure also told this story. Whether it was the princess of the Empire or the great teacher, the angle they chose to tell the story was naturally completely different from the main character of today's story. The following was the story told by the most famous student of the former master of the Empire, Fan Hua Jiyu, and also the most hated man in the Empire. He was also the most irreplaceable military god of the Federation, Li Pifu. At that time, we were still very young. We didn't know which space that black-haired, black-eyed young man who was not much older than us fell from. We only knew that he taught us some very strange things, and then we found out that he was actually from the Empire. What is the Empire? When the research spaceship of the Federation was blown to pieces by the cannons of the Empire. Because of political reasons, we didn't know. Even if we did, we were still young and couldn't have too much hatred for the Empire. Being too young is not an excuse, but a fact. Speaking of which, I have to mention another student of my teacher. He is my brother, your teacher. You are used to calling him uncle, but you should know that he has many identities. In fact, just like me, who is about to be engraved on a tombstone for people to consume, his name is not very important. As for me, I still call him Li Pifu, just like when I was young, I always call him Li Yu. After talking about Li Yu, let's go back to this era, a story so long ago that even I feel that it is a bit vague. It seemed to him that our teacher was a pacifist traveler who had taken a fanciful trip to the stars out of curiosity. I admit I was curious, but not pacifist, especially when, many years later, I learned that the seed plan had come from his brain. I don't know how many years my teacher traveled in the Federation, how many places he went, how many people he met, why he stayed in the wildlife sanctuary in Philadelphia and taught us for so many years. I only know that he lived a good life in those years. I even forgot that he was from the Empire. However, the war still broke out in the end. Teacher took us to the Empire in a spaceship, and we spent a very strange time in the Empire. In fact, I have to admit that in the future battles, the 17th Division would be able to achieve more feats than the other Federation troops, and this is all thanks to this. I have been to the Empire, and I know about the Empire. My teacher taught me many things about the Empire. There was one more thing that he had to admit. In the Federation in the future, Liu was able to successfully develop the blue light instrument that his teacher had first proposed, and finally successfully used the spaceship's reference chip to successfully create the camouflage chip, all because of his teacher's teachings. But we are from the Federation. The Federation and the Empire are at war. We are orphans in the Empire, and if we leave, we are also orphans wandering the universe. I don't like wandering, I don't like the Empire. There is only love and hate when there is comparison. When you live in the Federation and the Empire, you should know very well which side is more suitable for human life. But my brother is different. He can't find a home for himself, an ideal place that doesn't even exist. He loathes charter for watching his every move. He loathes those families hidden behind the history of the Federation. He is too conceited and even a little narcissistic. He thinks that he can change some of this. He was a genius. He solved the problems that my teacher couldn't solve. He didn't need to pretend to be a returnee from Bermuda. He could play any role he wanted. But at that time, the conflict didn't escalate because it was only a difference in philosophy. It didn't involve something as important as life and death. Schiller once said that in this world, other than life and death, everything else is irrelevant. I lived for 88 years before I gradually understood the true meaning of this sentence. The story became more and more intense. It was also a story of life and death. Where should this story begin? It should start from when I returned to the Federation. As I said before, I am from the Federation. The Federation is at war with the Empire. What choice should a person from the Federation make? The precious selenium-rich hot spring water from the foothills of Feicheng City flowed slowly through the natural water pipe made of old bamboo, through the rice paddies and the fish ponds. It passed through the green walls of the courtyard and quietly entered from the corner of the eaves. It then converged into the 7 or 8 square meters coarse stone pool. The hot steam flowed slowly like a white dragon, rising from all directions and filling the room with blurred vision. It was like the so-called truth from many years ago. There were very few people who were qualified to enter this manor by the lake of Feicheng City. Over the years, only the Madam of Macho Back Mountain was qualified to enter this manor. But that madam must have taken off her clothes and entered the bath naked. Therefore, thinking that he was the only one who had the honor to enter this pool, Su Lu began to feel a little nervous. As a person from the Federation, it was an honor to be able to share a hot spring with the military god. An ordinary military green towel was tightly wrapped around his right hand, causing white foam to form from the friction. Su Lu held the old man's thin shoulder with one hand, while his right hand steadily and forcefully wiped the old man's back in front of him. The old man's wrinkled and lifeless skin had disappeared. Looking at the old man's thin body in front of him, he didn't know why, but he felt extremely sad. I am also a person from the Federation. After hearing the old man's question, Sulu lowered his head and thought for a moment. Then he put his right hand into the hot spring and continued to wipe the old man's back. He answered seriously, "In that case, of course, you should choose to join the army to resist the invasion." Li Pifu, who was soaking naked in the hot spring, no longer had the heroic image of the military god in the Federation's propaganda film. He was just an ordinary dry old man. His silver hair was wet and tangled by the spring water, which made him look even more embarrassed. The old man coughed painfully for a few times and then said in a hoarse voice, "I also thought so at that time." The story after that was actually a bit lackluster in the first few decades. Do you understand the meaning of the phrase, lackluster? It's probably a shortened version of the Federation's proverb. I'm used to saying this because there are similar words in the Empire's language that my teacher taught me back then. Speaking of my teacher again, because in the next few decades, my teacher, Empire's master fan Hua Jiyu, has been helping the two emperors of the Empire invade the Federation. There's not much I can do either. I joined the army and started as a normal soldier in the 17th Mechanic Division. Squad leader, platoon leader, company commander, battalion commander, regiment commander, and all the way to division commander. I've never been a deputy commander. This fact sometimes made me feel proud in the military camp, but sometimes when I thought about how this pride was only taught to me by someone from the Empire, my pride would often turn into mockery. So I worked even harder, or rather, fought even harder. On the front lines, on the battlefield, in the rear, and in my interactions with those politicians, I hid all my shortcomings and hid all my loopholes, all for the sake of standing at a higher position and having more power to completely dispel that mockery. Back then, the Federation was in a very dangerous situation. Very dangerous. In the Westwoods, in the Empire Star region, I also encountered many dangers. Then I did the most dangerous thing, and that was, at the critical moment of a great defeat, I counterattacked like a madman and killed the Empire's emperor. Sulu, you've also been crazy before. You know that this kind of thing often relies on luck. My luck back then was pretty good. I fought many battles in the army, and many of my comrades and subordinates died. I thought that the Federation had also contributed a lot, but it couldn't compare to this at all. It seems that I, Li Pifu, have only done one thing in my life, killing the Empire's emperor. This is really boring. No one has ever dared to think that an M37 thousands of miles to assassinate the Empire's emperor is just boring. Sulu lowered his head and rubbed the old man's back. He muttered in a low voice with great disapproval, "If this is considered boring, then can't you let me be bored a few more times? Little brat, killing is just a means." Li Pifu comforted him with a hoarse voice and said, "What humans need is often the results." Of course, the result that time was pretty good. This has to do with luck. But from another perspective, my luck back then wasn't that good. Because when my eyes turned red, I forgot about life and death, forgot about the flying trajectories around my mecha, forgot about those screaming Empire's mechas, and even forgot that my name was Li Pifu. I only knew that when I was smashing the middle-aged man under the black hibiscus flag into minced meat, I didn't notice that Master Fan of the Empire was also beside him. His name was Hua Jiyu, and he was my teacher. He taught me a strange ability that made my whole body tremble. Many years later, I used this ability to kill him. My teacher was a very beautiful black-haired man. He had a pair of eyes that spun faster than the stars. But at the last moment, the moment before he died, those eyes that were staring at me through the screen didn't even turn. In the hot pool, the god of war Li Pifu slowly told the story of killing his teacher. Although his voice was as calm as usual, his skinny body suddenly froze. The ripples on the surface of the hot spring instantly became calm. Su Li's right hand that was rubbing his back also froze. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.